The Rune Smith. Chapter 111. Nobles arrive. It's hot. A young lady with long blue hair was peeking out from within a lush-looking carriage. She could see the outlines of a city in the background. The interior was quite spacious, and the moment she closed the blinds the warm air was unable to pass inside. So this is all Brook? Why do we have to be the ones being sent to the sticks? Another voice that belonged to a girl was also heard. This one was more high-pitched and belonged to a golden-haired girl. Charlene, you shouldn't say that. It's our fault for being late with picking our assignment. What if the locals hear you? What of them? You care too much about those commoners, Lucille. The blonde girl by the name of Charlene looked slightly annoyed. Both of these girls were wearing very similar clothes. It was clear that they were some kind of uniform. But aren't they interesting? They were able to build this city and are able to live near a dangerous dungeon. That's all because they have us. How could they build the city without us nobles guiding them? I'm sure if they tried they could manage themselves. Ha! My papa always says that the commoners are like headless chickens without us. Ah, if the Viscount says so. Lucille smiled a bit, but it seemed that the girl didn't want to continue this conversation anymore. Her friend here had clearly made up her mind and she would be unable to change it. Do you think we will be able to pass the last test? Lucille asked while peeking through the blinds some more. Why shouldn't we? It's just another dungeon, we also have the knights with us. I'll be counting on your ice magic to keep us cool, Lucille. You can count on me. The two girls continued to laugh and chat and soon heard a knock on the door. Lady Lucille, Lady Charlene. We will be arriving in a few minutes. A voice of a young man was heard by the two and they instantly knew who it was. Thank you, Sir Robert. Lucille blushed a bit as she saw the young man after moving the blinds to the side. He was riding on a horse, he was of above average height and wearing shiny half-plate armor. This man was packing a bit more meat than the regular youth his age. His hair was of brown coloring and he looked manly. The lady and the knight's gaze met for a moment. The intense stare that the two were giving of towards each other was stopped by Charlene. Shouldn't you be going back, Sir Robert? Ah, excuse me, my lady. The young man moved his head to the side while also slightly blushing and finally trotted off on his horse. He joined up with other men dressed in similar armor. All of them had a certain crest that didn't belong to any noble family but to the academy they hailed from. The crest looked like an armored knight on a horse. He was holding a lance and pointing it into the air. The carriage that the two girls were riding on also had a certain crest. It was a different one, it had a depiction of a robed man holding a staff. You should stop talking to that person, Lucille. We weren't really talking. The girl with the blue hair snapped back to reality while holding her red cheeks. It was clear that the two were attracted to each other, but there were certain problems that came with that. He hails from a baron's estate, he isn't even the heir, Lucille. You need to find yourself a proper husband that is at least a viscount. How about Lord Abington instead? He shows a lot of promise. Lord Abington? Lucille lowered her head while thinking about the young man that her friend was talking about. He was a few years older and she saw him a couple of times at some noble parties, but she didn't know much about him. On the other hand, Sir Robert was someone that she kept running into from time to time. The two had bonded a bit through the years, but she was also a daughter of a viscount. The youth was not a full noble as he came from a mistress instead of the lady of the house. He had no rights to his estate unless the heir died. Don't even think about taking Lord Percival, he is mine. Lucille then thought to the person Charlene mentioned. He was the heir of a count estate, but there were bad rumors around him. Apparently, he was a giant womanizer that liked to sleep around. Her friend here didn't think that the rumors were true and was more interested in the wealth and title she could grab from a marriage. She was a young lady that spent quite a bit of her life reading romance novels. She preferred the young knight to the older noblemen that she met at parties. Her friends called her immature and warned them about silly acts of romance that didn't further the noble cause. Lord Percival isn't really my type. Good. Now help me fix my hair. The two girls pulled out their pocket mirrors and started looking each other over. They were stuck in this carriage for quite a bit and could not look bad when leaving it. Their looks still remained important as they were ladies in their prime. Even well after achieving their mage classes, this concern about their appearance remained. On the outside, the group of nobles was greeted at the gate with a salute from many guards. If Roland was here he would have a good laugh at how properly the guards were working for a change. Nobles were not people that would visit such cities that weren't even properly developed. The noble house that this territory belonged to didn't even have any of their family members stationed here. Most of the time younger members of the family would be tasked with something like this, while their elders remained in the big established cities. This also depended on the number of offsprings. If there was no noble family member, then someone like this city's mayor would be given the job. To the noble house, the mayor was nothing more than a servant, not even at the level of the official butler of their house. He was only there to make sure that they were getting the taxes and that no one was being disrespectful towards their name. This same mayor was looking out through his mansion window while his sweat was gathering on his forehead. He knew that this day would come and he dreaded the thought of anything happening to these noble brats in his city. He wasn't directly involved in this expedition, but he might be held responsible if anything went wrong. Relax, you old fart. How could I relax? The Duke will have my head if anything happens to those noble ladies. Even though they are only the daughters of viscounts, they are both mages. That's why I don't like those noble bastards, treating each other like breeding livestock. A familiar figure was sitting down on a large couch that was barely containing his frame. His bald head and greyish skin was a dead giveaway of his identity. Ordhan, shouldn't you be at the guild? What if one of your adventurers does something stupid? You can't have anyone offending any of those nobles. Some of those knights are also from influential families. My guys aren't that stupid. Well, maybe there is one. The guild master scratched his head while standing up. A face of a particular airhead guild member entered his mind as this question fell. I'll take my leave then. You worry too much, my men have been clued in. They are there to guide them into the dungeon, nothing more. After reassuring that his adventurers wouldn't be picking any fights with the noble lords and ladies, he departed. This was mostly a pretext to get out of the mayor's mansion. He knew that the overweight butler that visited him a month ago would be coming here as well. That man was quite unpleasant and condescending. He would be coming here to impose on the mayor's hospitality and also to discuss business. Ordhan did not want to be here as he feared that he might punch that fatty the moment his double chin came into view. The party members aren't the best, but nothing much I can do with these limited resources. Hope I'm not wrong about that kid. The guild master thought back to how he reeled the runesmith youth in. Due to the trinket, Roland was wearing, he couldn't figure out his real class, but he was sure that he wasn't the average runesmith. When he compared him to the craftsman dwarves, there was a stark difference. For one, his fighting capabilities were far ahead of what a dwarven runesmith was capable of. It was clear that he also had a way to use his own runic weapons more freely. He didn't seem to suffer through the biggest weakness that magical armor or weapons put a user through, this being the high mana usage. It was clear that he either had a massive pool of mana or some special class skill that allowed him to do this. The other thing was his combat ability. He had been clearly trained by someone. Mages and craftsmen that the runesmith class came from mostly did not have proper combat training. Him being able to win against Armand 2 times clearly showed that he was capable. There weren't really many smart people in this guild, and Roland seemed like the closest thing to a mage that this city had. There were a few older spell slingers that were working here, but they were too old to take part in expeditions like this. Having someone that was aware of the mana around them was always a big advantage in a dungeon. There was also the Tier 3 party leader. He was an expert tracker and good at detecting ambushes plus also traps. He went with this man instead of someone that would be better at actual fighting. It was safer this way, as avoiding combat was what he was going for. Their work would mostly consist of acting like scouts. The battle portion would be supplied by the noble knights. Greetings, Guild Master, you're looking tired today. Ordhan was greeted by the elven receptionist girl. She was rubbing her eyes while also drinking a cup of warm tea. It was early in the morning and it would take some time before the nobles returned from the mayor's house. They had some time to get ready and he wanted to have a little talk with everyone before they left, mostly with Armand and Korguk. These were the two meatheads of the party. Korguk was violent when he had to, but he wouldn't step out of line as long as there was someone in the party that he respected. With the team leader being tier 3, this part was secured. Unless the nobles actually attacked the party, there was no real danger of the half-orc running wild. On the other hand, his old golden boy Armand was more headstrong. He feared that if some of the noble brats got under his skin he might do something stupid. The guildmaster wasn't quite sure himself why he was putting faith into the young man, but he somehow reminded him of himself when he was young. Armand had a certain look in his eye, he was hungry for more. He always took on the harder missions and came out victorious. It might have seemed that he didn't take anyone else into account, but he actually prioritized his party members over himself during combat. He was someone that could be relied on. The biggest problem here was that he had a hard time admitting to his wrongdoings. The guildmaster wanted Roland and Armand to figure things out down in the dungeon. He was of the mind that if two men were forced to work together with each other for survival, they would somehow figure things out along the way. He was banking on this happening during this expedition. Getting Roland to take this mission might have been a little rouse that he had set up. The manufacturing schematics that the young runesmith was aiming for were given to him via an old promise. The price wasn't actually that high, as the runesmith was someone that he had once saved before. The old dwarf was hard to convince, but after bringing up old history he caved into the demands. He had made a promise that he would keep. Ordhan also reassured that he would be giving this knowledge to a runesmith and not sell it on the auction. The guildmaster was aware of how craftsman types thought. Just as he thought Roland was unable to pass up on something like this. The small danger of the dungeon was not enough to sway a proper runesmith away from more knowledge. If you think that I look tired, you should have seen the mayor. That poor bastard looks like he didn't shit for at least a week. The guildmaster laughed while the elven receptionist scrunched up her nose at the thought of the mayor's bowel movements. Is everyone here? Almost. I haven't seen Korguk yet. Lobelia and Armand just came in. Mr. Wayland and that person from the Solaria Church have been waiting since early morning. Mr. Silvio is also here. Ha, we can start the meeting without that blockhead, just have him wait if he comes over. The guildmaster was sure that the half-orc would arrive smelling of cheap alcohol. It would be actually better if he wasn't there when the nobles arrived. Where are they now? I instructed them to go into one of the waiting rooms. Woof, woof, woof. While talking to the receptionist, the guildmaster heard a loud barking sound. The sound was clearly coming from the main corridor that led up to his office as well as to most of the other guild rooms. Did someone bring a dog to the guild? Mr. Wayland brought his tamed monster over. I think he wants to take it on the mission. Well, that's fine, but why is it being so loud? Beats me, it looked quite gentle when I saw it, maybe someone stepped on its paw. The elven girl shrugged while the guildmaster moved towards the corridor that the noise was coming from. After pushing the door open, he saw that all the commotion was about. Those two really don't get along. He saw both Armand and Roland looking at each other. Lobelia was standing next to Armand while Agni was barking at the large muscle man. Both of them looked like they were going to fight, which just made the guildmaster here nervous. Before he could go over to deliver a fist to Armand's head, the young man took a step forward and did something unexpected. Hey? Could you repeat that? Armand started to nervously scratch the back of his neck, his gaze wavering while not meeting Roland's eyes. Ordhan could see him move his lips, but he wasn't sure what he was saying. This became apparent after the next line. I said I'm sorry. Now get out of my way. Armand burst out in rage while quickly running into the room that the meeting would be taking place. Hey! He apologized. You'll have to excuse him, Wayland, it was hard to convince him to do this. I'm surprised that he even went through with it in the first place. Ordhan then heard Lobelia call out to Roland while laughing. It was clear that Armand was somehow convinced by someone to give out an apology. It was quite forced and not really genuine, but it looked like a good start. At least to this guild master it did. What Roland felt about the whole thing remained to be seen. "I see," were the words that left Roland's mouth, then finally noticed the guild master standing to the side and greeted him with a small nod. "Well, I see that you two are getting along just fine, hope you invite this old man to your wedding." Roland's face contorted in various ways. This day his helmet was off so everyone could tell how uncomfortable that comment made him. The party of 5 with a half-orc missing had a quick talk before the mission started. Before the guild master let them leave, the elven receptionist knocked on the door and peeked in. "Excuse me, guild master, a knight has arrived and he wants to see you." "Finally they are here, you lot get ready and remember what I told you." Everyone headed outside. Some of the party members like Lobelia were interested in how this noble knight would look like. The exit was along the way and Roland was in the front. He opened the door and took a step forward but then froze in place instantly. Lobelia that was behind him bumped into his armor and almost fell back onto her posterior. "Hey, why did you stop?" She then saw the armored man quickly taking a step back into the corridor while hugging the wall. She saw him quickly place his helmet onto his head while slightly fidgeting. Confused at his reaction, she looked outside. There stood a young knight of unknown origins leaning up against the wall and waiting. Chapter 112, Making Them Wait. Hey, what's your problem? You think that just because you can sense mana that it makes you better than me? What are you even talking about? I never said anything like that. Is your head made out of mush? Shut up. Hey, stop it. 2 children of young ages were seen fighting. One was clearly older than the other and the height difference was apparent. The smaller child was covering their head while the larger one was hitting it. Soon some servants came and were able to pull the larger boy of the smaller one. "Let me go. Young Master Robert, you mustn't. The Lord has forbidden such behavior." "Young Master Roland, are you okay? Does it hurt anywhere?" While the youth by the name of Robert was pulled away while flailing around, an older maid could be seen hugging the younger boy. "What took you so long?" the boy replied while rubbing his bloody nose. It was a bit odd that the younger boy was more composed and was not even crying. The older boy on the other hand burst out in tears the moment the adults arrived and started reprimanding him. "What happened?" "Lady Francine, young Master Robert attacked Master Roland again." The lady that arrived now started tending to the older boy while just giving Roland a side glance. Without saying anything she started walking away. It didn't seem like she would punish the boy named Robert, nor did she help the one called Roland. Master Roland. The boy that was close to 6 years of age gave out a sigh while dusting off his clothes. "It's fine, Martha, I'm used to this." "Oh, Master Roland." The old maid quickly gave the young boy a hug while tearing up. The boy on the other hand looked more annoyed than sad at the small cuts and bruises that he had suffered. This was one of the many memories that were now rushing into Roland's head. He had just stepped out from the guild's corridor and saw someone that he didn't expect. It was one of his older brothers, the youngest of them called Robert Arden. Just like him, he was someone that came from a mistress. He had no claim to the main Arden estate and was treated more as a resource. The last time the two had seen each other was during a family gathering that was more than 6 years ago. Robert then was already at the Knight Academy working as a squire. The young teenage boy that he once knew was replaced by a large imposing young man instead. Even though he hadn't seen him for so long, he instantly recognized his older brother. The hell is he doing here? Why would he be here so far away from home? Did he recognize me? No, there is no way for him to know, I'm still wearing my armor. Roland was now backing away from the corridor while slightly panicking. There was no reason for his older brother to be here, he should have been in a Knight Academy that was deeper inside of the mainland. There could be a few possibilities why he was here of all things. One of them was to find Roland, which he was the most afraid of. The other one was the more bearable explanation, which would make this only a coincidence. The young lords could transfer from academy to academy and also perform tasks to gain merits. The academies worked similar to schools where you gained credit. This dungeon expedition could have been one of those assignments that would give a lot of credit. It might have been the best option for him to finish his Knight Academy. Robert was 3 years older than Roland. The trainee knights would be done with school at around this age. This could really just be the last assignment for him. He would even get more merit points for crossing the sea and getting on this island on his journey, which would then allow him to be done with the academy sooner than most other young lords. Calm down, this doesn't have to mean anything. Whine. While still being a bit shocked, he felt Agni poke his leg with his nose. He was finally able to snap out of it. Lobelia was now standing next to him after he had come to a stop. It was clear that she was confused after bumping into his red armor. "Hey, what are you doing?" Soon Armand appeared from behind and just walked through the door through which the Guildhall was. Roland flinched a bit while backing off, still a bit afraid of showing himself. "So that's one of the nobles? Doesn't look that special to me." "Hey, be quiet, he might hear you." Lobelia elbowed Armand in the stomach, that caused him to flinch a bit. The two were now looking at the knight that had come to the guild. Luckily for everyone, Silvio was there as well. He was the team leader and had already been clued into this meeting. "Good day, I'm the leader of the party that has been hired for this expedition." He stretched out his hand towards this young man in shining armor, but instead of a handshake, he got an empty stare. The young man continued to look over the people here before answering. "Good, we have decided to rest for the day. You are to meet us at the dungeon entrance tomorrow." Silvio retracted his hand while keeping his cool as the conversation continued. "At what hour should we meet?" "Just wait for us, we will arrive." It seemed that they wouldn't be getting a proper answer and that this knight might not even know when they would be there. They were not in a position to complain, they were already hired for a large sum of money. Waiting for a few hours outside the dungeon entrance was the least they could do. "Very well, we shall wait for you at the entrance tomorrow." "Good." The young man nodded and then quickly removed himself from the guild. He seemed to be in a rush while also having the look of disdain on his face. The moment he left the guild, Roland finally decided to peek out. Who does that prick think he is? Yet, he was being awfully rude to Mr. Silvio. Armand and Lobelia commented after seeing the scene being played out. It was strange to look at the young knight be disrespectful towards a person that was in the position of a tier 3 class. "It's fine, you know how those nobles are, no respect for anyone other than themselves." Silvio didn't seem too concerned though, he even had a slight smile on his face as he continued to look at the door through which the young knight left. "Listen up everybody, it looks like we will have to postpone the departure as our little noble guests have decided to stay for the day. It would be better if you avoided them altogether, we wouldn't want any incidents to happen, now would we?" Silvio said while looking at a certain muscle-bound person. "Hey, why are you looking at me like that?" "Don't worry team leader, I'll keep him away from any trouble," Lobelia proclaimed while puffing out her chest. "Hey, stop treating me like a little kid, why would I get into trouble? He isn't very aware of himself, is he?" Silvio turned to Lobelia while raising one eyebrow. This team leader has already been clued in by the guild master about Armand's tendencies. The half-elven girl just laughed while Armand's face turned to confusion. While all of this was happening, Roland was slowly entering the guild hall. Now without the knight being here, the coast was clear. "Hey, didn't that knight look familiar?" Lobelia turned to Armand while asking. Her older brother just shrugged as he wasn't someone that really cared about men's faces. "Oh well, see you tomorrow at the dungeon Wayland." Lobelia waved at the slightly spaced out Roland while also pushing Armand out of the guild building. Soon everyone went on their way with only Silvio remaining here. "You should go home, get some sleep, we don't know how much rest we will be able to have with those nobles around." "Ah sure, see you tomorrow then." Roland nodded while moving towards the exit slowly. He was wearing his armor and his entire face was covered. There was no reason for him to be discovered. His voice had also changed, so in theory his older brother shouldn't be able to figure his origins out even if they talked. The only thing that he needed to watch out for is removing his helmet. Luckily he was part of the adventurer party and not of the noble knights. He would not really need to comply if they even ordered him to show his face. After stepping through the guild's door, the first thing he saw was a large green man heading his way. It was the last party member that was already late, Korguk. The two stopped in their tracks and looked at each other. Roland wasn't really sure what to say to this guy as they had never really interacted before. Korguk on the other hand had a certain alcoholic smell to him and wasn't speaking either. The half-orc nodded and Roland nodded back, unsure of what was the meaning of this gesture. The two then went on their way with Korguk entering the guild building behind him. This was followed by a sneezing Agni that was a bit more susceptible to the odor. "Let's go home for now, Agni." Woof. It seemed that the coast was mostly clear. He could see a carriage out in the distance. It clearly belonged to the nobles and was pure white. Roland also recognized the symbol of one of the magic academies that was there. Surprisingly, it was also one that was situated deeper into the mainland. Through this, his theory of the young nobles getting more points for the prolonged journey on this mission started making some sense. The not fully mapped out dungeon would also add to the mission's difficulty rating. The foolhardy youths were probably ignoring the dangers that could come out of this over getting better grades. Roland knew that the possibility of unforeseen dangers was low, thus this might have actually been a good gamble. He wasn't sure about how they rated this, but the added grade could allow the participants an early graduation. The Magic and Knight Academies took long and stunted the level of growth of their participants slightly. They focused mostly on leveling up skills over pure leveling that experience points gave them. Even with that, they came out stronger than their adventurer counterparts. Mostly from having access to better knowledge and unlocking more prestigious classes. "I already signed the contract, I can't turn back now." His first instinct was to cancel this mission. Regretfully, he already signed one of those magical contracts. He was already promised the manufacturing knowledge after completing the mission. Only after that, his deal with the guild would be finalized. If he quit now, he would have to pay dearly, not only with money but also with his time. This was understandable as the guild's reputation with the nobles was at stake. The guild master needed to have everyone sign a contract that couldn't be broken easily. Otherwise, the whole party could fall apart even on the day when the mission started. Then the guild would need to pay a massive fine. The more gold you earned during the mission, the more was required from the guild. The nobles were sure to pay more to get some insurance. If the guild wasn't able to deliver their side of the deal, they would be punished accordingly. The mission that they would be taking on didn't seem that difficult, so it wasn't strange that the guild master agreed to these demands. To him, the nobles were already overpaying by a lot for something like one party of adventurers. They would be even doing most of the fighting themselves. It was almost like free money. Roland's party only needed to stay with them as lookouts and assess the situation. If everything went as planned, it would be similar to a camping trip. The carriage was far away, but he could see some of the armored knights following after it. He wasn't sure which one of them was his brother, but it didn't seem that his position was that high. They used him as a messenger. He clearly is only one of the grunts here. Roland had an idea as to why this was the case. It was all tied to noble status. Someone from a baron's household was mostly on the lower end of the hierarchy. Robert's mother was also only a daughter of a merchant, she was not nobility. Bloodlines were taken very seriously in this kingdom. His father Wentworth was also just a first-generation noble. He gained his status thanks to his military prowess. Unless the bloodline was connected to some old nobles or lasted at least 3 generations, a person wasn't yet seen as a proper member of the noble caste. Robert was probably fighting an uphill battle, a battle that Roland evaded with him leaving his old home behind. He knew that as the 4th child of a baron he would be treated like a commoner. Having to be bullied by smarmy noble kids for years to come was not something that he wished to do. For some reason, his brother Robert was the reverse. He was adamant in showing his own worth to his father. The moment Roland showed that he had an aptitude for mana, the two got into many fights. Roland had a few ideas about why this was happening, and Robert's mother had something to do with it. The kid has his own problems. Hope he matured a bit since last time. Roland wasn't really mad at his siblings for being like this. They were the product of their surroundings. The wives pressured their children into being the best while hoping for them to get high positions in society. The noble life where your image and status was everything was very cutthroat and fake. It wasn't rare to see one of your friends or allies throw you to the wolves the moment they find a better deal elsewhere. Everyone needed to prove their worth before they could achieve anything. Robert was clearly taking the same path as his father did. With a turn of his heel, he headed in the opposite direction that this convoy of noble people was heading. Bernier was quite surprised when he saw Roland being back already. There was not much to do besides checking if he didn't forget anything. He was sure to fasten his helmet to his armor as much as he could. It would have to stay on there for quite a bit. On the next day, he said his farewells once more and went to the meeting place. It took less time than going to the city, and he didn't need to force his way through the crowds. "Praise the Sunday," was what he heard when he got there. Sister Kasia was already there, just like the previous day. He was the second person there. Roland started wondering if Sun Church clerics had some kind of sleep resistance skill like he did. The woman had to have been here for some time, as she was sitting on a blanket and was already drinking tea. "Would like to talk about the ladies' gospel while drinking tea, my friend?" "Oh, now, I'm fine." This place was outside the dungeon, right, and not far away from the forest. They were near the main path, so they would see other party members if they finally arrived. Roland leaned up against one of those trees while waiting. Silvio was the third person to arrive, with the brother and sister duo of Armand and Lobelia being third. Korgik, as before, was late by a whole hour, but this didn't matter much. The nobles took their time, and even when the sun was close to reaching the very sky, they weren't here. "Damn nobles making us wait." Roland heard wood cracking as Armand punched a tree. They had been stuck waiting for multiple hours without anything to do. They had some noble ladies with them that were apparently mages. It was reasonable to believe that they wouldn't rush over here and only arrive after a filling meal. "Hope they won't tell us to come back tomorrow," Lobelia commented while yawning. "Don't worry, the guild will pay us more depending on how long this mission takes. The contract began yesterday, so we'll get compensated." Silvio started reassuring the party of mad adventurers. "Woof! Think they are here?" Roland proclaimed after Agni barked out. Soon the sound of horses and a carriage could be heard by all of them. The time to delve into the dungeon has finally arrived. Roland was sure to fix his helmet once more. His main task was to make himself inconspicuous. "It's time to earn our keep." Silvio called out for everyone to get ready while also moving out first. He needed to discuss some things with the leader of the noble side. After that it was time for some dungeoneering. Chapter 113 Slow Starts. Roland felt a little jittery this day. They had waited till almost the middle mark, and the longer it took the more stressed he was. He had almost forgotten that his family could even be looking for him after all these years, but now he was about to face one of their members. His older brother Robert, that he didn't really get along with, was riding on the horse a bit behind an expensive-looking carriage. He was one of the accompanying knights that hailed from the Luxon Dark Knight Academy. It was clear to him by the design of the silvery armors that they were wearing. This was one of the more prestigious schools that a noble could attend. He was sure that Robert only studied there due to his father's involvement in the academy. Wentworth, his father, like the members of the family before him, had attended this very academy. The Arden House had produced many knights, but only after his father rose to be the #1 position in the academy did the name start gaining fame. There was a strict hierarchy the students followed, and he managed to reign supreme. Martha was the one that told him this tale. In it, Wentworth was painted as a heroic man that went through many missions given to him by envious nobles. All of them were jealous of his talents and wanted him to fail, but he never faltered. He achieved something that was quite rare: he raised his house name into a proper noble rank. Knights were somewhat considered to be nobles, but they were mostly treated as mere soldiers. If one of the parents was in the possession of the knight class, the children would be able to pick this class later in life. Unless they went down the same path, the class would be lost to the third generation. This was also why parents usually pressured their children into becoming knights themselves. Only if they were raised to official nobles could the class be passed down without a limit. The noble trait was a hidden title that was not seen by the system. People speculated that it was connected to the bloodlines and would be unlocked only when approved by other nobles in a given country. Higher noble titles could also sometimes unlock more prestigious classes. Then there was the carriage. The name of this academy was Xandar's Institute of Wizardry. It was named by some old legendary wizard that lived many millennia ago. The two schools were in close proximity to each other. This was also probably the reason why these two institutions were working together on this expedition. Roland knew this place quite well, as he had researched it before his ascension ritual threw a wrench into his plan. If he had normal elemental affinities, he would have probably been attending classes at that very academy for young mages. Fate worked in strange ways. He was now looking at the two academies that he might have been a member of. If he had stayed behind, he would certainly be stuck in the school that Robert was about to finish. The adventurers that were walking towards the dungeon were forced to the side by the many knights. They were all together, which allowed Roland to count 20 greenhorn knights and 2 young girls that probably haven't even seen a goblin before. Next to him, Silvio was leaning against a tree. He, as the others, weren't looking that favorably at this group of nobles. Roland understood well where they were coming from. The mission was pushed back by more than a whole day. Having to wait without anything to do was not how these adventurers liked spending their time. Roland could have easily crafted some runic equipment in this time and gained some experience. Instead, he was stuck rechecking his equipment without anything else to do but to wait. "Everyone wait here, I'll go talk to our young lordlings." Slowly everyone started to get up. Korgak had to be woken up with a smack to the head by Armand. This drunkard was probably the best rested team member, as within the first half hour of waiting he had fallen asleep on the rough ground. "Isn't that helmet a bit stuffy?" Roland's attention was brought to the side. Lobelia was there. She was in the process of stretching out, as she had also succumbed to drowsiness. "No, I'm fine." Due to the danger of his brother recognizing him, Roland was sure to never remove this helmet out in the open. Even he instantly recognized Robert, even after not seeing him for over 6 years. It was very likely that his brother would be able to do the same. "If you say so, I'll be counting on you." The girl shrugged, while also for some reason giving him a smack on the shoulder. He didn't really budge from his spot, and instead, he could see the half-elven girl's hand become a bit red. "Ah, sure." Due to how the party formation was set up, he would be handing out with Lobelia in the back. "Woof. You too, you cutie." Agni's mouth was open soon as Lobelia started rubbing him behind the ears. Roland was surprised that his ruby wolf opened up to someone so quickly. The girl seemed to have a knack for talking to tamed monsters, and Agni was clearly enjoying the scratches. While the girl was playing around with the pooch, Roland took his time in examining the noble party from afar. Most of the members were young adults. After some quick scans with his analyzing skill, he could tell that they were mostly at the onset of the Tier 2 Knight class. They were mostly split between the Shield Knight and Sword Knight class, which Robert was part of. All of his brothers like him were forced to master every weapon type that was used by a Knight class. This was all for the sole purpose of easy advancement in the future. Most would focus on both of these variants, which would unlock the High Knight class. There were also harder variations that would unlock the Crusader or Knight Champion classes instead. There was one person that was above all of them when it came to levels and strength, though. His armor looked bulkier, and he was the only knight with a nice blue cape attached to his shiny plate mail armor. That guy must be their commanding officer. Silvio was in the process of talking to this man. He was clearly past his 40s and also a Tier 3 class holder. Roland couldn't really see his stats due to the difference in levels. His identification skill still was lacking levels to allow him to peek on everyone's status screen. The only thing he could somehow tell was that his level was close to Silvio's. Probably a high knight. Don't think they would let anyone with a more prestigious class be an instructor at a knight academy. Roland knew that even though this man's level was high, he couldn't be counted on during combat. This instructor would prioritize the noble children instead of the adventurers. He would probably focus on the two noble ladies that were now coming into view. That one is a frost magician. First, he saw a young girl with long blue hair stepping out of the carriage. She was wearing a somewhat light-looking dress. It was white with a skirt that went down to her knees. Her feet were covered by long boots that also went up to about knee height. The upper part of this robe was form-fitting around the chest area but became looser around her arms. In one hand she was holding a large staff with a large blue crystal. This crystal was clearly a type of mana stone that would lower her casting requirements. The second person that stepped out from the carriage was also a girl, her hair quite blonde. She was wearing a similar robe but the staff she had a more brownish stone embedded in it. That one seemed to specialize in earth spells. Frost was clearly the weakness of fire elemental monsters but the reverse was also true. Earth would be the better option as it took quite the temperature to melt hardened stone into lava. It looked like the two mages put some thought into picking a fire-type dungeon for their mission. A frost magician would come in handy. A simple spell that lowered the temperature could cause some of the fire monsters to suffer quite a bit. The volcanic salamanders for instance were quite susceptible to these sorts of spells. On the other hand, a frost magician would find it hard to create their spells and concentrate with a high concentration of fire elements in the air. Thus it was a double-edged sword. It depended on the strength of the magician. She would be able to deal more damage but casting would become difficult. Either she is confident in her spells or she is underestimating the difficulty. Roland with his runic spells could circumvent the casting difficulty. He didn't need to concentrate much. Inserting his mana into the pre-made structure was the only thing he needed to worry about. The two ladies were wearing various accessories like necklaces, rings, and earrings. Even from here, he could tell that they were all magical tools that probably either increased their mana capacity or spell power. There was a certain lack of mana stones on most of those accessories. They were clearly crafted with the help of the manufacturing knowledge that he was hoping to get after this expedition was over. Unless he got his hands on that, he would be forced to attach bulky mana stones to his creations. This would pose a problem later on, as these monster crystals only increased in size with the strength of the monsters they came from. While Roland was glancing at the two young ladies from afar, Silvio finally returned. "Okay, listen up people, we will be clearing up the path for the nobles. All the way up to the boss room, it's time to earn our keep." Apparently, the nobles weren't interested in killing the lower-level monsters. From Roland's perspective, they wanted to conserve their strength before the Tier 2 monsters arrived. The first one they were going to be battling would be the 10th level boss that he faced. With so many knights and 2 Tier 2 mages, even if it was the Ruby Golem, they would probably survive. "Agni, stay close to Sister Kasia, your job is to protect her if something happens." Roland pointed to the nun from the church that was in the middle of the party's formation. Agni gave out a bark and quickly moved to his position. "Oh my, what a gallant protector!" The nun chuckled while looking down at the ruby wolf. His tail was swinging side to side while he was striking a pose. "Wayland, I heard from the guild master that you can give us magical support from the back." Sure." Roland nodded while taking out something from his own backpack. It was a long metal rod with a large blue crystal at the very top. There were also some smaller mana stones embedded on the rod's shaft to lower the mana usage. This was a runic staff of his own making. It was mostly straight with the top part looking like a hawk's claw holding the large mana stone in place. Roland didn't give this weapon any gimmicks or detachable parts. It had a couple of spells engraved into the spell structure that, thanks to his basic knowledge of the runic code, could be activated at will. It worked in similar fashion to the arming sword design that he made before. It was a more advanced version that would allow his spells to be activated faster. The only downside to this was the thick and heavy design he had to go with, This was mostly to save up on runic corrosion and so that he had a lot of material to perform repairs later. Due to this, the staff wasn't really something another magic caster would find a use for. Roland had a high strength stat all things considered, while most mages had meager gains in that regard. The heavy weight would also allow him to use it as a weapon if he ever needed it. Here, keep it safe. Leave it to me. Roland handed his backpack to a certain person wearing a large backpack. It was even larger than the one Bernier was stuck wearing. This person was a regular human and a steel-grade adventurer that was hired as one of the porters for this party. The nobles had some of these carriers following them around with large spatial backpacks as well. This person was not really part of this party but would be staying with them in their encampment. A steel-grade adventurer was entrusted with this mission instead of a regular porter, as they were going down into the lower levels. Mostly people that lacked combat classes took on these types of jobs that paid less than what a proper adventurer could earn. Because of the dangers below the 10th level, the notion of regular porters was abandoned. Roland knew this, so he didn't even ask if Bernier could come along. The young man that was coming with them was slightly older than he was. He was in his second Tier 1 class. His first one was the usual scout class, while the one he had now was archer. He looked to be mostly spec'd into agility and would have no problem of running away if things got too dangerous. With everyone finally ready, it was time to descend into the dungeon below. His party with Silvio in the front was awaiting further instructions. Before heading down, they had to wait for the nobles to get information as well. With Roland being directly in the back, he would be the closest to the knights in the front. Luck was really not on his side, as the furthermost knight just had to be his older brother Robert. He, like most of the other knights, was wearing silvery half-plate armor. There were two people from the group with more extravagant-looking gear. First was the Tier 3 High Knight instructor, and the second one was a handsome young man with golden hair and blue eyes. Is that the commander of the knight unit? Just like his adventurer party, the nobles had some kind of commander in their unit. A person like this had to be someone from a well-off noble house and also be quite skilled to get this position. At this moment, the lady that had the earth elemental staff was walking next to this man and blushing. Would be nice if they stopped flirting and we could get this over with. He and the others arrived early in the morning, but these nobles had gotten here about 15 minutes ago. It was clear that they didn't care if they made the commoners wait. Roland just gave out a sigh and turned in the opposite direction. One of the reasons was boredom, while the other was his brother. The less both of them interacted, the better. Oh! What is this? While minding his business, he felt someone approach from the back. At first, he ignored the callouts as he thought that the nobles were talking to each other. Soon he felt someone poke the back of his armor. The voice clearly belonged to a woman. Where did you find this? These runic structures are so well made. Did a master craftsman fashion this for you? Hey! Roland turned around to notice the blue-haired lady mage standing really close to him. He looked down at her as she was more than a head shorter than him. Lady Lucille, please be careful. Robert quickly appeared like a lightning bolt and moved his hand between the two. Roland took a step back while being surprised. The noble lady, instead of listening to Robert, continued to look at his runic items while her eyes shone like bright blue moons. I see that the noble lady has a keen eye. For some reason, Lobelia, that was next to Roland, decided to talk. She clearly had no problem speaking up even in front of a noble. You might not know this, but Wayland here made this all by himself. He is a very famous runesmith with more talent than even the dwarven smiths. Roland tried glaring at Lobelia, but due to wearing his helmet, this was unnoticed. Instead, Lobelia gave him a thumbs up as if she thought that she was helping him strike some deal with these nobles here. This, sir, is a runesmith? I have dabbled a bit into runecraft, but I haven't seen such a unique runic composition before. Is this some kind of new spell? The young girl became quite chatty while Roland remained silent. The biggest problem remained his brother Robert, that was giving him the stink eye. Luckily for him, the blonde man that was the commander decided to walk over. Lady Lucille, please don't inconvenience the adventurers. The moment the young man called out to this young lady, Roland could see an instant reaction. "Ah, Lord Percival, I apologize, I shall return with haste." The young woman was quick to go back while evading this man's sharp gaze. Roland wasn't sure what this was about but was glad that this man could exert control over this girl. "You, return to your post." Robert wasn't even graced with a name as Lord Percival ordered him to get back. Finally, everyone got into their designated spots and it was time to descend below ground. Chapter 114 Nights in a Dungeon. A group of annoyed adventurers was standing outside the Albrook dungeon. They had to stop as a large group of knights forced them to remain behind. They surrounded the whole entrance and were keeping people from going in or even from coming out. The thought of going over and pushing through never crossed their mind. The noble crests were a clear indication of trouble. No person with an inkling of intelligence would ever involve themselves with nobles unless it was work-related. Without much to do, some decided to wait while others listened in, curious about the meaning of them being here. "Lord Percival, you may start." "Thank you, Sir Bertold, I will do my best to finish this mission with haste." They could see two men in full body armor talk to each other. One was old while the other quite handsome and young. After the little talk that the two had with each other, it seemed that something was happening. "Everyone get in formation, we will be descending into the dungeon. Follow after the adventurer scouting party." With that order given, the people could see a party of adventurers entering into the dungeon. There were some unknown members in this party, but some people recognized Armand and the crimson armor of a certain person that was gaining notoriety. "Interesting, that guy is also part of this." A shadowy figure whose face was mostly covered commented from the side. He and a few of his party members were sitting in some shade while examining the situation. "Is something wrong?" "Don't know, it might be a gig, I'll have go ask my contacts to be sure." "Oh." The robed man started rubbing his chin while grinning. His eyes followed the large armored man in red, and how not far from him the noble knights descended into the dungeon as well. Back in the dungeon, Roland and everyone had taken up their positions with their porter hanging out in the middle. Whenever the fighting started, he was tasked to search for cover and hide. All of the party members here were silver grade, so the dungeon monsters that were below the 50th level didn't prove much of a challenge. They were more annoying than anything and mostly fell to Lobelia's arrows. Roland let the fighting up to their two warriors in the front without wasting any runic spells. Armand and Korgik were actually quite proficient at taking out any monsters that they came across. The half-orc's weapon of choice was something that looked like a very large cleaver. It only took one swing of his weapon to kill a monster that came his way. Armand, on the other hand, used his hands. The monsters were either smacked away into a pulp or thrown to the side where they were finished off by Silvio or Lobelia. "Don't really have anything to do here." Roland was somewhat relaxed while not having anything to do. Agni, on the other hand, was gaining some experience from finishing some lower-level creatures. His level had risen to 32, but he had a long way to go till his Tier 2 evolution. He knew that if he showed the shortcuts they would be able to cut the travel time dramatically. However, he decided to keep this secret for himself. It was better to have an escape route for himself that no one else could follow in case of unforeseen circumstances. Even though there was a low chance of betrayal, it was better to be safe than sorry. "Damn, those knights are slow, what's taking them so long?" Lobelia commented from the side while pulling out her arrow from a less evolved salamander-type monster's head. They all were seasoned adventurers that had gone through dungeons since a young age. The knights, on the other hand, were rarely forced to travel through tight corridors like this maze. Roland attributed their slow-moving speed to a few things. One was their choice of armor, that in a volcanic region like this was mostly a liability. Without something to lower the temperature, someone with heavy armor would become fatigued quite fast. Due to this, they had to make some stops and have their frost mage cast a cooling spell from time to time. The second problem were those lady mages. They were clearly not used to long expeditions into unknown regions. Roland was sure that their physical stats were not much better than a Tier 1 warrior. With low endurance, they would need constant stops and the heat would only get worse with time. "It's fine, Sister Kasia can use a break as well." "Oh, I'm quite fine thanks to Mr. Wayland here. Silvio called out to the nun that replied. Roland was just standing there while waving that large magical rod of his. From time to time he would produce a chilling effect to make it more comfortable for the party. Thanks to it being a runic spell, there was no waiting time and he could do it easily while walking. Wayland, want to come party with us after we are done with this mission? Lobelia nodded. Roland could see that she was serious. He only started doing it after he noticed some of his party members sweating. This section of the dungeon wasn't that hot, but when some salamanders showed up the temperature always increased. The dungeon wasn't that well ventilated, so fighting a fire-based creature always made it uncomfortable to be in. I'll think about it, he replied while not really thinking that it would be such a good idea. Bernier and Agni were enough as he was able to maximize on his experience gain. The other problem was the person he was looking at. He certainly didn't want to work with a certain punch-crazy brute. The only reason he took this mission were the costly crafting schematics he wanted. I'll take that as a yes. Oh, they caught up. Lobelia answered while notching an arrow into her bow once more. Roland glanced at this arrow for a moment and started wondering if he could add a runic effect to it. Regretfully, without the proper wood, it would be impossible. The only other option would be a fully metallic arrow, which costs outweigh its uses. Maybe if we find one of those ash trees in the lower levels I could actually make some. They descended down while Roland thought about what he would do for the weeks they were there. At the moment they had some work to do, but after getting to the second level they would be nothing more than lookouts. What would normally take a couple of hours turned to 8 as they finally arrived at the 10th level of the dungeon and were now right before the boss chamber. A group of angry adventurers greeted Silvio that could only apologize for taking so long. The adventurers here were tasked to block the dungeon chamber from being cleared out. This of course led to some pushback from the other adventurers, but they could do nothing more than wait. They must have paid quite a bit for this offer. The longer this chamber isn't cleared, the more money the guild loses. While Roland contemplated on the noble's deep pockets, the battalion of knights arrived soon after. He moved himself to the side as one of the first people here was Robert. Their first task was over now. The ones going inside would be the nobles first and they would remain in the back. This would be their first test, to beat the 10th level boss monster. The knights looked slightly tired, but they were still tier 2 class holders. Their high physical stats would allow them to somehow recover in a short amount of time. On the other hand, the two mage ladies were not looking that well. Roland could tell with the help of his mana sense skill that they were using some cooling effects even at this very moment. Even when not affected by the heat that much, they still looked tired. There was no way to fit the carriage into this dungeon, which forced everyone to walk. The constant usage of mana to run magical trinkets was also probably taking a toll on them. The two more than likely had lower amounts of mana than him, and not many classes had skills that lowered the mana usage when using magical items as his did. Are those two okay? Maybe they need to take a cold bath. Lobelia and Armand were to the side smirking a bit. Roland noticed that these two didn't seem to like these nobles that much. They constantly commented on their slow pace. It seemed like there was some bad blood here, but that was quite the common occurrence. Most commoners either feared or disliked their noble overlords for one reason or another. Finding a common person that favored a noble was like finding a rainbow unicorn, which was a creature that actually existed in this world. Lady Charlene, Lady Lucille, how do you fare? It's so stuffy in here, someone give me some water. The blonde lady called out to one of the knights that quickly brought over a water bottle. You expect me to drink from this? She glared at the poor knight that shrunk back. Luckily for him, the blue-haired lady was quick to take the bottle of water and pour it into a proper glass container. Lucille, you're too lenient with these knights. Charlene took the glass and started to slowly sip from it, which put the whole expedition on hold. Though the moment the commander walked over, the haughty look disappeared from this young woman's face. We need to continue, please get ready, we will be entering the boss chamber. I need both of you to be prepared for battle, I'll be counting on your support. Lord Percival, I'll do my best. Roland rolled his eyes while looking from the side. The person called Charlene was quick to act like a little puppy when the correct person was in the picture. He could see Armand and Lobelia scoffing from the side as well. "Get ready, we will be going in after the knights." Silvio walked over to give some orders. Roland took this time to ask a question. "Will we need to get involved in the boss fight?" "We are to stand by and watch, only when the knight formation crumbles will we act, prioritize the mages and that blonde noble over the others." Roland and the others nodded. They were aware of the power dynamics in that noble party. The only important people that they were actually contracted to bring out alive were the two women and the noble called Percival. The rest were expendable knights that were in a situation similar to Robert's. This was the harsh reality of the boundaries between status. Robert and the others were placed very low on the pecking order. They were either bastard sons with no way of getting the rights to their estate, regular knights, or one of the many sons from a baron's estate. If he was there, he too would be quite expandable. "Get ready, they are going in." The knights took up an arrow formation with their shields raised and pushed through the boss chamber door. Following behind them were a smaller group of knights that surrounded the two mages along with their commanding officer. Behind them was Roland's party and the man named Sir Bertold. This was quite the number of people going in. It shouldn't be that hard to clear up the boss chamber with so many tier 2 class holders here. Even a ruby golem that he faced would be unable to combat so many knights and 2 mages that gave them fire support. The only problem that Roland had in this composition was the lack of scout-like classes. They only had heavy warriors and 2 mages. They lacked the fire support a class like an archer could give them and had to rely on the mage's large spells. These spells packed more destructive power than an arrow but were also less accurate. Accidents did sometimes happen, so the knights would receive residual damage from the mage spells. A pack of volcanic wolves. The platform was the same as before and on it was a small group of monster wolves. There were 4 regular volcanic wolves at level 50 with a slightly larger one in the middle that was level 60. "Woof. Calm down Agni, this isn't your fight." The wolves were somewhat similar to Agni but instead of rubies, they were covered in hard volcanic rock. Their paws were mostly covered in this volcanic rock with some fissures. These cracks were glowing with some kind of red energy that looked like hot magma. They were also adults and a bit larger than Agni's adolescent form. They were all waiting for their opponents to arrive. For the time being the group of knights was slowly moving forward on one of the pathways that connected to the center platform. His party and the others had just entered the boss chamber and the door behind them slammed shut. With this also the pathway they were all standing on started sliding towards the platform the monsters were on. There was no turning back as behind them only molten lava awaited. There was enough time for them to move forward but the party of knights was moving sluggishly. They seemed a bit unorganized, some of them probably surprised after seeing the molten rocks below. "Are those guys okay?" Lobelia asked after seeing the group of knights clash against the tier 2 monsters. To someone not versed in monster fighting, it would be hard to spot a problem but a seasoned adventurer could see it. "They are hesitating too much," Silvio added from the side while preparing his own bow. "They do feel a bit sluggish, this heat takes a bit to get used to." Roland had to agree with Silvio on this one. The knights were successfully defending against the 5 volcanic wolves with their shields but were slow to counterattack. Then there were the 2 mages that had a hard time delivering a finishing blow. These wolves were fast on their feet, the long casting times were the biggest downside to the mages' battle tactic. After performing the spell they needed to guide the attack not to where the enemy was but to where they thought it would move to. For a short while this was also a problem for Roland when he was training with his own spell casting. Oh! It seemed that finally, the mages thought out some kind of strategy. The blonde girl finished up a spell that didn't target the monsters but instead softened the ground under them which caused their legs to slide in. After this effect subsided the ground hardened up which left 2 of the wolves stationary. I guess they did teach them something at the academy. Following this, a spear of ice pierced through one of the monsters before it could free itself. Then the second wolf received a stab from Robert that was close by. With one monster down and another one injured, the battle continued. The battle was quite boring to watch. The knights were efficient and their commander used his troops to slowly encircle the remaining wolves. There were far too many enemies for these 5 monsters to come out on top, and soon they found themselves with many stab wounds. Is it over? I almost fell asleep. Armand was down on the ground just sitting with his finger up his nose. Korgak next to him doing exactly the same thing. The battle was won with the last monster succumbing to their wounds after a long battle. After it was all over, the usual chest appeared, but before they could peek inside it, a little commotion came to light. What is the meaning of this? Why did you leave your position? Robert stood with a red cheek that was smacked by his commander. Apparently, he had broken formation during the time he stabbed one of the wolves. To Roland, it looked like the right thing to do, as the monsters weren't much of a challenge for these knights. The person called Percival didn't see it this way. He was probably the one who thought this defensive tactic was the best way to proceed. What if one of them made it through and one of the ladies got hurt? Robert was seen slumping his shoulders forward while dropping his head. After some more scolding, he could see his half-brother walking away with his fist clenched. He had earned guard duty for the first night due to not following orders. The chest was holding some kind of low-quality magical dagger that one of the knights took away. Soon the path towards the lower level was open and the expedition continued. Chapter 115 Dungeon Camping. It's hot, too hot. A young lady moved the collar of her robe to the side to air it out. She felt warm and sweat was slowly building upon her ivory skin. Charlene, please, the knights might be looking. The girl quickly moved her hand away while looking to the side. For a moment she forgot that there were many men around this encampment that they were building. What are those useless knights doing? Is our tent ready yet? After the boss chamber was cleared out, the group of knights and nobles descended to the large underground volcanic area. However, they had taken quite some time to get through all the levels, mostly because a certain someone that liked to complain a lot had taken many breaks along the way. The leader knew that everyone was getting tired. Percival decided to build an encampment not that far away from the boss chamber. There they discovered a large cave. This area was mapped out well, so after clearing out some monsters they knew that they could rest here for the night. The monsters would respawn periodically, but they would not do it in areas that were populated by many people. The noble ladies had entered the cave as it was slightly cooler than the outside. The knights were still assembling the tents along with a few porters that were carrying them around. Here, this should help. Lucille placed a small metal plate and placed it on the ground. On it, there were various runic symbols in a little circular spot in the middle. Into that spot, she inserted some kind of blue marble. The moment she did, the magical device activated. The runes started shining in a blue hue while giving off a nice cool breeze. It seemed like in a small diameter around this device the climate started changing. What would I do without you, Lucille? Charlene quickly moved over to where the plate was. Soon she looked to the side of one of the knights that was stationed here as protection. Bring us some chairs. Yes, my lady. The knight nodded and quickly went outside to procure the items that the ladies wanted. Soon the two were sitting around the magical device, looking at the marble in the middle starting to dim. This pseudo-Elachian gem won't last for long. I know, but it will take a while to connect the fluid apparatus to everything. We'll get worse grades if we don't prioritize our defenses first. Lucille replied to Charlene, who was in a bad mood. Normally these two were given priority, but now they were on a mission. Percival was the leader, and if he continued to pamper part of his battalion, the teacher from the academy might lower their grades. The knights needed to set up the perimeter, build tents, and add any fortifications that could help against a surprise monster attack. With this, the two people that couldn't really do much were left here in the cave to their own devices. They were both mages, but they were not needed there to assemble the tents. These tents that the knights had were of the same type that the group of adventurers had. There were no actual craftsmen with them that could do any repairs. Everything would have to be done by the knights or by the people they hired to help them. The adventurers were also part of their forces, and even if they acted more as scouts they could be given certain tasks without failing the test. Go ha! Hey? What was that? It sounded like a monster. The two girls looked at each other for a moment and quickly grabbed their magical staves that were placed against the wall. Following the strange sound outside they could hear that the knights were shouting out something. Oh, is it dead? When the two ladies arrived outside they found two dead volcanic salamanders. One had many stab wounds while the other a severed head. It's dead? Why did no one tell me? Charlene complained a bit while pouting. Before the girl ran outside she had fixed her hair and robe so that Lord Percival would see her at her best. With the monsters dead she would not be able to show off anymore. Lady Lucille, you should go back inside, it's not safe out here. Sir Robert, are you okay? The blue-haired girl looked at the young man from the Arden house. His silver armor was covered in some blood and so was his sword. Don't worry my lady, this is only the monster's blood, I am uninjured. Lucille took out a piece of cloth and moved over towards Robert. The young froze in place as the lady started rubbing the blood out of his armor. My lady, you shouldn't. The other knights started looking with narrowed eyes at Robert and the mage. Soon enough Lord Percival arrived to scold everyone. All of you, get back to your posts. Lady Lucille, please return to the cave. Someone explain to me what occurred here. Robert flinched and turned back to the commander. After doing a salute he gave a recount of the events that transpired here. The two monsters crawled out of the small lava pools and attacked them. Robert managed to chop off the head of one while the other was taken out by two other knights. Any damages? Commander, one of the monsters damaged our tents. How serious is it? Another knight that was there came over and also started making a report. During the struggle with the volcanic salamanders, one of the tents was hit by its attack. The item was mostly intact but its runic structure was damaged so it wouldn't be able to be operated anymore. The cooling effect wasn't activated, sleeping in this tent had become impossible now due to the heat. One of our tents is already damaged so soon. Lord Percival, can't we just replace it? Charlene moved in from the side. Her shoulder rubbed against the Lord while she batted her eyelashes in his direction. The girl wasn't really that interested in this conversation, but if the man she was eyeing as a suitor was involved she saw it as a chance. Yes we do, but... Percival knew that the tent could be replaced but this was still a finite item. This was far too soon into their expedition to be losing their resources. He was already contemplating on letting more of the knights sleep in the cave instead and saving the tents for the future. If only we had someone able to repair it. Percival mumbled. Don't we? Lady Lucille. Lucille looked at Percival and then pointed out into the distance. There the two small tents of the adventurers were situated. They could also see a man dressed in crimson armor looking from afar. However, the moment he was noticed he quickly made a 180-degree turn and slipped into one of the tents. The adventurers. Yes, I've read their roster, that man is a rune smith, he might be able to repair the tent. While most of the nobles ignored the adventurers, Lucille had gone through their abilities. The guild supplied them with their names, ranks, and general skills. The man dressed in red armor was quite the particular person as his class was listed as unknown runic craftsman. Are you sure, Lady Lucille? Yes, I heard one of his party members mention it, she was quite boisterous about it. That armor he is wearing is also a runic item, I'm sure that he made it himself. Percival looked to the damaged tent and then to the group of adventurers in the distance. Using their runesmith to repair the tent would not be seen as a demerit, so there was no reason not to try. You, bring the runesmith over, tell him to repair the tent. Report to me when he is done. Percival looked over to Robert that was already standing at attention when facing the expedition commander. Yes sir. Oh, see, can I come with? Before Robert could leave, Lucille poked her head into the conversation. She looked to Percival for approval. The young man looked back, not sure why the young girl wanted this. Lady Lucille. Oh, I'm interested in the runes. Aren't they just so interesting? They are similar to the magical language in so many ways, yet also so much different. The girl's eyes started shining brightly as she started talking about her love for runic items. Her blonde-haired friend from the side gave out a sigh while moving over to Percival. Lord Percival, why don't you allow Lady Lucille to leave? The knight will protect her. Charlene was quick to wrap her arm around her target while yanking him away. The man looked a bit baffled by this, but he didn't back away. People that knew the ice mage knew that she was quite the brainy type. She loved spending her time reading old texts on magic languages and spells. Even if she didn't have the class to make them work, she would study up in hopes of gathering more knowledge. Fine. Percival soon gave in to the request and Robert was left with the blue-haired lady there. The two looked at each other for a moment before Robert decided to speak up. My lady, please remain close to me. How reassuring, but I can protect myself, Sir Robert. The girl raised her magical staff up and gathered up some frost elements as she showed off. Robert gave an awkward smile and the two departed towards the adventurers' small encampment. What's up with them? Roland had ducked into one of the tents that he helped set up. There was not much to it as the instructions were quite easy. He had only managed to build this one up while the other one was being fiddled on by Armand and Lobelia. The two troublemakers started egging each other on and finally, Armand made a vow to set up the other tent himself. He was now in the back, fiddling around with the metal pipes while Lobelia continued to tease him about his slow pace. Oh, Mr. Wayland, would you like some tea this time? Oh, no thank you, I'll have some later, Sister Kasia. He and Kasia were the two people that weren't required to be on guard duty. However, this also meant that they would be staying together in one of the tents while the other party members switched up in the other one. Roland was not really worried about having to sleep next to a rather charming woman. No, the real problem was that she just wouldn't stay quiet about the Sun Church. She would offer him tea and crackers, but then the sermons would start. She would constantly pray and praise the sun. There was almost nothing else that she wanted to talk about besides Solaria and tea. Roland gave out a sigh while relaxing. Their encampment was a bit further away, but he could clearly see the nobles. He was there when Robert defeated the volcanic salamander and he had to give it to his older brother. There was some talent there. While the other knights poked the other creature to death with their long swords, Robert managed to behead it with one strong swing. It was clear that his swordsmanship was on another level compared to the other young knights. I guess anger does motivate some people. Another memory of his brother popped into his head, one of constant training. Even though Robert didn't have any particular gifts, he did have a good training ethic. There was no day that he didn't see him swinging his sword or doing some weight training. With the stigma of being a bastard son, he did have to prove himself more than the first and second son. This wasn't really time to think about the old days. Roland couldn't remove his helmet outside, but he also didn't want to stay in the tent for too long. With this, he decided to take a step outside and help the others with the second tent, as he was also worried about something going wrong. Hey, you really can't trust this guy. After arriving at the spot where Armand and Lobelia were, he noticed that something wasn't right with their creation. The leather had not yet been placed over it so he could see the tent's skeleton. These runic pathways are broken. He could see that the tent poles were squeezed in repeatedly into the wrong sections. Some of them were bent out of place or scratched. Runic structures had no protection against physical damage. If the metal was damaged, cut or bent too much, they would stop working. See, I told you to be more gentle. Lobelia delivered a swift boot to Armand's behind while they continued to fight. Can you fix it? Silvio asked Roland, that was kneeling down and looking over the damage. No problem, just give me a moment. Roland moved his hand into the spatial bag and went digging. Soon he pulled out his hammer and a thin piece of metal. The others looked with interest. This would be the first time that they would actually see Roland do some rune smithing. The thinner piece of metal was used to heat up the damaged parts. The sections that were heated up would be then gently struck with the face of his hammer. This hammer was somewhat smaller than his usual crafting hammer and it produced sparks fueled with mana each time it connected with the damaged part. Oh, that's neat. With the small hits of his hammer, Roland pushed in his mana into the runic structure. When it was softened up through the use of his wand, the runes were easy to mend back up into shape. In this case, he could have even used his rune mending skill, which would make the whole process a lot faster. It would be a waste of mana and resources as the structure would just degrade. There, this should do it. Try not to damage it again. Yes, sir. Lobelia performed a somewhat half-hearted salute that mimicked the knight's. She then turned around and invertedly collided with some chest armor. She fell back onto her posterior only to spot a rather large man looking down at her. This man was the same knight that visited the guild the previous day and he looked grumpy as ever. Hey, what's the big idea? Lobelia wasn't paying attention as she was focused on Roland's rune smithing. For someone like her that had a class with high perception, this was quite a blunder. Is there a problem? Armand appeared almost instantly and placed himself between his friend and the large man. The two had similar builds, but Armand was still slightly wider while also wearing less armor. Roland on the other hand froze in place while holding his crafting hammer. The man that he wanted to avoid was right here and it was still just the first day of the expedition. Fascinating. What pristine mana control! The silence was broken by the blue-haired ice mage that came from the noble side. She focused on the item that Roland was holding in his hand and quickly moved forward without even looking at the other people here. Robert even tried to stop her, but even before he could stretch his hand out, the girl was gone. There was also the problem with Armand standing in the way, which increased the tensions even more. Is this a runesmith's hammer? Haven't seen one like this before. Did you make it yourself? I can see that it has some runes that help conserve and control mana. What type of mana stone is this? The girl moved over while constantly talking. Roland didn't know what this was about and the girl kept looking at his hammer. He was quite surprised that she figured out what runes he was using. This wasn't something a normal person would be able to do. Yes, I made it. Can I help you with something? The moment he casually spoke out to the noble lady, Robert's face showed a frown. Adventurers were seen as commoners, so addressing a noble without the title and proper diligence was considered very rude. Thus he stepped forward, but a large tanned hand held him by his shoulder. Hey, I'm not done talking to you. Armand was also not someone that held nobles in high regard, thus he had no problem stepping forward and get physical. Robert reacted by moving his hand to his hip where he had his sword and giving Armand a quick warning. Take your hand away or you will lose it. Ha, try it, Greenhorn. Armand was not scared. He was facing a novice knight that probably didn't have that much experience in close-range fighting. He had already made a mistake by stepping into his range. A quick submission move would take care of his opponent swiftly. What's going on here? Roland started to sweat. He couldn't really hear much as the blue-haired girl was babbling about runes without even looking back to Robert. It seemed that a fight would break out if no one did anything about it. I should have never signed that contract. Chapter 116 Runic Groupie. What's going on here? Sir. Robert, please behave yourself, we didn't come here to cause a ruckus. Silvio arrived at the scene to pull Armand away from the confrontation. Lobelia needed to have Roland point out that her bodyguard was close to fighting one of his party members before she reacted. It was a bit strange to see two people that he disliked almost get into a fight while he had to break it up. If the situation was somewhat different, he would just grab a bag of popcorn and let the two have at it. His money would be on Armand though, his level was higher and he also had more experience. He didn't see Robert being able to tank the heavy fisting. Regretfully, they could not offend the nobles. They were outnumbered almost 1-4 and the nobles' side also had a tier 3 high knight with them. Armand would be in a heap of trouble and they as well by association. If Lady Lucille wishes it. Robert frowned a bit more than usual, but he moved his hand away from the sword hilt the moment the blue-haired girl entered the frame. It was clear to Roland that there was something between these two young adults. The way his older brother looked at the girl was a dead giveaway. After observing Lucille's body language, he was also sure that she appreciated Robert's company. "I'll have to apologize for one of my party members, how can we help?" Silvio moved in front of Armand, who spit down on the ground while moving away. Korgak was observing the whole scene from the side, but he looked saddened by the fact that a fight didn't break out. With nothing to do, he was also itching to do battle. Excuse me, I was a bit rude. Let me introduce myself first, I am Lady Lucille de Vere." The girl curtsied before Silvio, who just looked baffled by the gesture. He lowered his head a bit and nodded while not being sure how to react to a noble lady. I'm Silvio, just Silvio." In this kingdom, something like a family name was mostly given to people of noble descent or to merchants that liked to put their businesses under their family name. Commoners, on the other hand, would only be given a name. If they had enough money or achieved greatness, they would be allowed to pick a name for themselves or have someone in a high position gift them one. "This is Sir Robert Arden." She pointed to her bodyguard that looked quite grumpy. His eyes met with Silvio's and he found himself twitching slightly. Roland noticed it while observing from the side. It was clear to him that his brother realized that this adventurer was a Tier 3 class holder. "Sir Robert? Good day to you." "Yes, likewise. Then how can we help you?" "The contract stated that we shouldn't get involved much after we descend to this area of the dungeon." Yes, let me explain." Lucille gave a recount of what happened in their encampment and how one of the runic tents was damaged during a monster attack. "Apparently the gentleman there is a rune smith, we'd like to borrow his services." Soon everyone turned over to Roland, who heard the whole conversation. The party here had seen the monster attack from afar, but it wasn't up to them to react to small pests like that. "Want to borrow Wayland? I don't see a problem with that, just return him in one piece after you are done." Silvio laughed and soon removed him from the conversation. His main purpose here was to warn people about monsters above a certain level. Unless one at the Tier 3 level appeared or a swarm of Tier 2 monsters attacked, he and the party wouldn't have much to do. Roland wanted to give his party leader a smack to the face, as he wasn't even given an option to refuse. Finally, the others started removing themselves from this spot and Roland was left alone with the strange girl and his older brother. He now stood before the two while silence fell upon them. He was the one to break it as he introduced himself. "It's Wayland." "Ah, a pleasure, Sir Wayland." "I'm not a knight, just call me Wayland," he replied in a somewhat monotone voice. It didn't seem that his brother had realized that he was his younger brother. From what he could tell, he looked somewhat annoyed, probably from the way Roland was talking. Due to being a person from the modern world, he wasn't that used to showing proper decorum. Then he had spent quite a bit at a noble's house, but no one really cared to give him any ethics classes. Things like that would be brought up at the Mage or Knight Academy that he would have been forced to attend if he didn't run away. Yes, so you want me to repair some of the tents?" "Yes, do you think you could take a look?" "Yes, sure." Roland nodded as he knew that refusing now would not be something he could do. Even though he didn't want to involve himself with the nobles nor with his brother, he had to. He was obligated due to the contract that he had signed. "Let me get this over with. Why is that girl looking at me like that? Should we go?" After his reply, there was a moment of silence. He noticed that this blue-haired girl stopped and just continued looking at him. Soon he realized that she wasn't really looking at him but at his runic armor instead. She did say something about runes and was quite focused on his hammer before the two idiots started bickering. "Yes, of course, excuse me, it's just your armor, it's so fascinating. Did you really make it yourself?" "MHM." After another awkward moment, they finally moved towards the night camp. The girl took up space to the right of Roland while Robert was to his left. He could see that his brother wasn't amused and he was even holding his hand on his sword. Trust was certainly something that he didn't have here, one wrong word or move and he might have to defend himself. "And that hammer of yours, I'm sure that it was one of these runes." "Wait a moment, Sir Wayland." Lucille stopped for a moment while putting her hand into a pouch on the side of her robe. After some digging, she pulled out a thick book that had some runic symbols on it. The girl started flipping pages through it and finally opened up on a section that had one of the runes that he placed on his hammer. Here it's the common mana proficiency rune. Roland stopped in his tracks and looked at the content of this book. In it was indeed the rune that he used, or at least a variation of it. He was well informed in many runes, and with a glance, he could see some flaws in the runic structure. Something like this didn't even require his debugging skill, as he had gone through so many runic structures that picking out flaws had become easy. This wasn't the interesting part about this diagram, that was the book in question. It looked quite thick and even had a small magical academy crest at the side. Yes, that's a similar rune, but it has some flaws, he replied while focusing on the parchment. Due to having had to mostly teach himself about runes, he was astonished to finally see a proper book about runes. It had descriptions of common runes. The most he could hope of buying himself would be a book with lesser runes. The ones at the higher grades were hidden away by dwarven craftsmen that only allowed people from their circle to go through them. Flaws? It's an intermediate rune model, you can tell just by looking. How magnificent! The girl's eyes went wider while looking between the rune on the book's page and the armored man before her. Roland, on the other hand, felt goosebumps all over his neck. He could tell that his dear brother was glaring at him. Which parts have flaws, if I may ask, Sir Wayland? It seemed that Lucille was keeping up with the Sir part, even though she knew that he was a common adventurer. The mage types did sometimes look at a person that was more knowledgeable than them as someone above them. This girl seemed to be interested in runes, and this was something that he knew well. Ah, sure, may I? Roland looked to Robert to measure his reaction, but his dear brother continued to glare. It looked like he wanted him to do what this lady asked him. Thus he asked to be handed this book of runes, doing it also out of curiosity. Here you go, Sir Wayland. He thought that the girl would not relinquish such a costly book that would go for many gold coins on the auction easily. However, she instantly put it into his hand when he asked her about it. Here, this runic pathway is out of alignment and this strengthening component needs to be moved a millimeter to the left. He mentioned some easy flaws that he had spotted, which only made the girl's eyes sparkle even more. Fascinating. Wait a moment, Sir Wayland. The girl quickly put her hand into her spatial bag and pulled out another book. She quickly flipped through the pages. Indeed. This would remove the small mana blockage and increase the spell output by about 6%. And you could tell just by a glance. The girl started going berserk in front of him while showing him another diagram, this time of the same rune but of a higher grading. The diagram also had some explanations to the side. It seemed that it was clarifying the flaws it had. Ah, sure, I am a runesmith. Roland wasn't really sure why this young woman was acting this way. These were still only common grade runes, all runesmiths should be able to work on them. Not just any runesmith could do something like this, Sir Wayland must be a master at his craft. Oh, thank you. It was unclear to him how he compared to the other runesmith, but by this girl's reaction, it seemed that he did something rare. Maybe it was a lot harder to spot mistakes in the schematics as he did for the common runesmith? Is that the tent? To get the girl's attention somewhere else, he pointed to a damaged tent that had a hole in the salamander leather. It looked like the monster somehow charged into it before being killed by the knights. There was still some fresh blood on it to prove his point. The other knights were also looking at him now. The cooling inside of his armor had to go into overdrive to keep him from sweating. He had hoped to never go into this camp filled with nobles. Saying the least while lowering his intonation was the most he could do. Ah, the tent? Can you look at this rune before that? Lady Lucille, I think we should let the adventurer do his job. Robert finally spoke up after remaining silent for the past few minutes. It didn't seem that Roland's cover had been broken. Ah, yes, you are right, Sir Robert. Please proceed. Robert moved to the side and Roland moved over to the damaged tents. These models were exactly the same pre-made ones that he saw the schematics for. The two ones that were at his party's camp had been slightly improved upon. He had risen the rune quality to the highest. Let me fix this fast and get out of here. Do I get paid extra for this? Roland thought to himself while moving over to the damaged tent. After investigating, he noticed that some of the scaffolding was bent and out of shape. The leather wasn't that ripped, which was good as it needed to keep the heat at bay. It didn't seem like the other people would be helping him much, so he needed to pull the leather to the side. It was bloodied a bit, but nothing that wouldn't come out if it was washed thoroughly. The side of this tent was hit by the monster. There was a clear dent in it along with some scratches in a few other places. This tent was made from a lesser alloy that included deep steel-like properties. It was similar to aluminum and made it much lighter but also less resistant than deep steel. It was a softer alloy that was good at holding runic spells, which it was made for. Roland couldn't see any embedded mana stones anywhere, which meant that it was made with the manufacturing technique that he was working towards. Good, at least I won't need to play with mana stones. First came the bending of everything into shape. Even though this was a softer alloy, Roland did activate his runes to give him more strength. With a better grip and added stats, he started bending the pipes back into shape. His evolved runesmith lord's eyes allowed him to spot all the broken runic structures without having to go through them one by one. This was one of the features of this skill, besides looking into the deeper sections of the runes to reveal their code. The rest of it was similar to the previous tent that he worked on. With the help of the runic wands, he heated up the broken parts till they were nice and red. He then started tapping them with his hammer while getting the runic structures into the correct shape. Luckily for him, there weren't that many broken parts and none of the rods snapped. If that was the case, he would need to weld them into place. The problem with welding was that he didn't have the same alloy to melt onto the damaged parts. Thus he would need to put ethereal pathways into the components instead. After about 30 minutes of working, he gave the tent a go with his own mana. The scaffolding started glowing blue and the small podest on the ground started releasing cold air. It was a success. The only thing that remained was to connect this to a mana fluid container that also had the proper runes on it. This container was placed in the middle of the tent on a small plate in the middle. This plate was connected to the rest of the tent and used the container with the mana fluid as fuel. There, it's fixed. You just need to place the leather over the tent. When he turned around, he saw a rather excited blue-haired woman. Robert was next to her, sweating a bit. He thought that the two would just go away and resume whatever they were doing, but instead, they stayed to watch him work. Sir Wayland, you must teach me about the runes. That red glow, is that some sort of strengthening spell? Does that armor have a cooling effect? You seem to be fine in this heat even when wearing thick armor. For some reason the girl was relentless. He wasn't sure what this was about. She was clearly a frost mage and not a runesmith. Without the proper skills, she wouldn't be able to craft any runes or affect them in any way. Is there some kind of rune mage class? Does she want to get it? Never heard of it though. Excuse me, Lady Lucille, but this wasn't what I was hired for. He was interested in the books that the woman had, but he also didn't want to remain in this encampment. Now that he was done with the repairs, he just wanted to return to his party. Without him around, he also feared that they might screw up the second tent again. Leaving it Armand's sausage hands was not something he wanted to do. Hired? Do you require some payment? I can pay. Is this enough? Hey! The lady quickly moved her hand into her bag once more and pulled out a satchel with coins. Roland opened up this satchel, and if his helmet was exposed they would see his eyes bulging. It was filled with large and small gold coins. He would need to work at least for a few months to get this kind of cash himself. So what exactly did you want to know about runes? Chapter 117, Gaining Knowledge. Bored, I'm bored. Lobelia called out while looking at a piece of grilled meat in her hand. It's stuffy, hot, I'm all sweaty and there isn't anything to do. We've been sitting here for 4 days already. Stop complaining, this isn't that bad. Armand was sitting next to her just chomping on a similar piece of meat which was much bigger. Both of them were sitting outside the camp area without much to do. A bit over 4 days had passed since they set foot in the middle regions of this dungeon. This region was different from the upper levels of the maze dungeon. It was a gigantic area that wasn't fully mapped even after a year had passed. It was also filled with Tier 2 monsters which already brought in some good coin. Most adventurers liked to keep it safe and didn't push in that deep. Though the biggest reason for the slow mapping out of this level was the smoldering biome. The further a party went in, the hotter it became. Lava-filled dungeons like this were historically hard to progress in. A party without a frost mage or magical items that controlled heat had no way of progressing. We get to sit around and do nothing, this is the best possible job we could get. Armand gulped down a large piece of meat that came from a salamander they had hunted. Surprisingly, this monster was very sought after for its meat and leather. It could be eaten without much preparation, as the hard part of this monster were its scales. After getting through them, the juicy insides could be devoured. I know that it's easy money, but there is nothing to do. Armand rolled his eyes while looking at the encampment of the knights. The group had been slowly advancing further into the dungeon while returning here with their loot. He had no idea what their purpose was here, but not like he cared. They had just returned from a small expedition an hour ago, so there was some movement now. While lazily looking around, he saw a certain armored man leaving one of the tents. Roland had been noticed by him acting strangely, and now for some reason, he was constantly visiting the noble camp. Heading out to your little noble lover Wayland. Hey! Lobelia had noticed him leaving each day to go to that camp as well. This would be his third time heading there. You can't fool my elven eyes, I see you going into that cave where they are keeping the two mage ladies, didn't know you were such a charmer, Wayland. She started shaking her hips provocatively while describing the situation. Soon Armand joined in on the questioning, as he did not pay that much attention. He is? The blue-haired one or the blonde? It's the blue one. Lobelia replied while Armand rubbed his chin for a moment before looking back to Roland with a dumbfounded look on his face. Whoa, good choice. She might not look like it, but she can't fool my eye. What do you mean? Lobelia turned to Armand as she wasn't sure what he meant by that comment. Not like a pancake, as you would even understand. Hey, what did you say? Roland looked at the two idiots fighting. Lobelia was quick to jump on Armand after the comment and started hitting him with her small fists. He was a large man, so he just covered his head while laughing. Those two sure get along, but I feel like I'm losing intelligence points the more I listen to their conversations. After a few days had passed, not much seemed to be happening. The knights were periodically patrolling the area around their encampment. They faced off against the monsters that were living here, mostly the volcanic salamanders and wolf types that were similar to Agni. There was also a monster called Firefly that liked to spit lava at its enemies and was the size of a domesticated cat. It was hard to defeat with only knights and mages in the party, but some of the knights like Robert did have some lesser archery skills that could be used on this occasion. He wondered if the teacher that came with them would lower their score for not bringing any archers to this expedition, but it might have been a requirement to only use knights. Agni, stay here. Roland leaned down to his ruby wolf companion that gave out a whine and started to look at him with those puppy dog eyes. I don't trust those knights, they might confuse you with one of the monsters living here. Agni, after his first evolution, had gained a lot of intelligence. Roland felt that explaining the situation to him would actually bear some fruit. Agni. But before he could convince his wolf to stay without giving an order, he was tackled from the side by an overzealous half-elf. Who is a good boy? The girl started rubbing the ruby wolf's belly and his hind leg began to twitch. Soon he flopped his tongue out and was in bliss. It looked like Lobelia had grown fond of his tamed monster, and with nothing else to do she bombarded poor Agni with pets and scratches. Don't worry, Wayland, I'll keep him busy. He just nodded while turning to the camp of the nobles. One of the knights greeted him along the way without doing anything to stop him from entering. He had made a small deal with the blue-haired woman. For money and access to the runic books she had, he would help her with some runic research. Roland was previously unaware of this, but mages could somewhat affect the runic structures themselves. Not by changing them with runecraft, but they could empower their effects with their own mana and even convert some simple runic spells to more complex ones on the fly with their own magic. These runic mages were somewhat able to affect the magic language that was embedded into the runic structure. They were unable to affect the outside of these runes. This was all dependent on the rune smith. This mage type was not that sought after due to this limiting factor. They relied on runic weapons without being able to actually alter the hardware part of the runic structure. If anyone wanted to maximize that class, they would have to get a runesmithing class as well. However, mages and craftsmen weren't that similar in that regard. Hammering hard metal into shape and working in a smithy wasn't something that magical types liked to do. Thus it was a very rarely seen profession. Roland was now aware of this class. It was also a Tier 2 profession. He wasn't sure if he could even acquire it due to the lack of elemental proficiencies. He could not ask Lady Lucille about it, as him not having any elemental affinities would be a dead giveaway to his true identity. If it was a worthwhile class was also up to debate. He could already affect the runic code with his Runesmith Lord class. It might have not added anything new, and the skills could very well overlap with one another. The only thing he would be getting from it would be the mage-focused stats if he went with it after his current class was maxed out. "You may enter." Roland was greeted by a new knight this time around. Luckily his brother Robert wasn't this lady's exclusive knight. Her bodyguards switched out from time to time depending on who was on guard duty. "Sir Wayland, I've been waiting for you. Have you read through the research material? Do you need more time?" Inside of the cave that the two girls were living in had changed a bit. There were some curtains made from some flame-resistant materials hung up all over the place. It separated each of the girls' sections. Further in the back there was even a toilet and a hot tub. It didn't look like these two were in any kind of danger. It was like a vacation. "Yes, I've read through them. It was very insightful." Thanks to this girl he was getting hidden resources that no one besides nobility could get their hands on. This blue-haired girl was really interested in runic magic and even had some proper skills related to them. He was unsure if she was trying to become a runic mage though. From his perspective, it would be a bad idea. The girl was already a frost mage, which was more of a traditional caster. If there was something like a Tier 3 runic frost mage class was unknown. Even if there was, would it be better than all the other Tier 3 classes that didn't need runic weapons? Really? So today we can discuss the lecture about. Roland wanted to ask if the girl was really serious about this, but he was not that nosy. She was already a proper adult and had to make the choices herself. If she really liked runic structures this much, she might actually be the right person to go for a runic mage profession. For a couple of hours a day, he would explain the runic schematics to her and how they worked. At first, there was a slight barrier between the two. He was self-taught, so he had no idea how proper mages were taught. Thanks to this encounter his eyes were also opened to the world of magic. He was given runic spell books and gained even a lot of experience by creating improved schematics of some of the runes from the books. Money and runes were given to him. This expedition already bore fruit. Even if they returned now and he didn't get those manufacturing secrets, he would be able to progress with his golem design. Just like that, a week had passed with not much happening. The knights continued to slay monsters left and right, and the corpses kept piling up. Soon it was time to move out, as the first part of the expedition was complete. With the order given, they all marched out. This time Roland's party was back to scouting out from the front while others followed after. Silvio was quite good at detecting any danger, which then was eliminated by either some arrows or runic spells. The fire-type monsters were just too susceptible to the cold effects. However, the further they ventured in, the warmer it became. With this, the ice magic started to falter under the heatwave that were the many lava pools. "Wait, we have arrived at the Molten Lake." Silvio looked at the map that the Adventurer Guild prepared for them. This section was quite far into the lava dungeon. In front of them was a large section with molten rock. It made it look like a giant lake that went on for a kilometer. In the middle of it was a sort of bridge that would periodically get flooded by this lava. Luckily for them, they had gathered the information beforehand. One unlucky party of adventurers fell to this trap. The lava would flood at certain times and engulf anyone foolish to walk through the bridge. We need to get the timing right or we will all die here. Silvio commented while Roland nodded. Are you sure those lordlings will pass through it fast enough? Armand chimed in from the side while throwing a rock into the lava lake. He as some of the party members were a bit unconvinced about these knights. They were quite slow and this section required a faster pace. It should be fine, that's not something we should be concerned about. Silvio looked at the sinking stone that Armand threw into the large pool of lava. It was quickly engulfed by it as it sank down. He used one of his detection skills while looking further than anyone from this party could see. There are a few of them. Get ready for a fight while we go across. A lot of what? I don't see anything. Armand called out while looking at the empty lake of lava. He could see anything besides bubbles of magma bursting, no monster in sight. There should be some monsters in the lake. Roland stepped forward, in his hand was a ball of metal. He injected his mana into it and a strange holographic landscape appeared before them. Hey, what's that? The party members' eyes widened after seeing the green light that this ball of metal was producing. This was an improved version of his previous mapping system. Now with some more knowledge about the inner workings of runes, this could be called a map. It's a map. See those red dots, those are monsters. The explanation was quite short, but Silvio, who was versed in tracking, didn't take long to figure this map out. This map was showing a lot of red dots below the surface of this lake. There were monsters, lurking to jump out at the chance of people crossing to the other side. Lot red. Korgak proclaimed while poking the light that was produced from this runic sphere. The moment the large digit poked one of the red lights, it was dispersed. This product was something that Roland wanted to introduce to the guild master after the expedition, so he wasn't worried about showing it off to the others. It could even be used as free if the group found use in it and told their adventurer friends. By this point, he had already decided on partnering up with the Adventurer Guild. Everyone also knew that he was a runesmith, so there was no reason to hide his wares anymore. The more people saw them in action, the more he could sell later. Quite a bit of them there, but we should be fine if we cross the bridge in time. If not, we could take the other path. Silvio mumbled to himself while Roland also inspected the area. He had been here before, but he had not ventured in further than this spot. From the previous adventurer teams that had gone past this point, they had gained some information. They reported that there was just enough time to get past to the other side while running at a moderate pace. Roland examined the distance a bit beforehand and also thought that if they bolted it, they would be safe before the whole thing was flooded. Even if the monsters appeared, they just needed to move forward to the other side without looking back. It seemed like an easy task of moving forward, that is if they didn't have certain two people that liked to slow down the others. Right, there was another path, he said while turning to Silvio. Yes, we could travel further west. It will take half a day, but there is another way. It's longer, the danger level is about the same, but we wouldn't need to move fast. There it was, two options, and the decision would be left to the noble leader Lord Percival. Though without even asking, Roland had an idea of which path he would choose. Silvio went away to make a report while the rest of the party waited. Armand and Korgak just stood there while yawning. Sister Kasia was right next to him and his large magical rod that gave out chilling air. Lobelia just continued to ruffle up Agni's fur, the poor ruby wolf's leg was in continuous motion. At this area, the heat started to become quite uncomfortable and it would only get worse the further they traveled. Luckily for him, the armor he was wearing had a constant chilling effect. He had made some armbands which everyone from this party was wearing that had a similar effect. They were all made from deep steel and could cover the body of the person wearing them in a thin layer of chilled energy. This wasn't an item that most of this group could use for a prolonged time due to the mana drain, but it could be used to periodically cool them down, or even save their lives if they found themselves against too much heat. So, where are we going? Silvio returned with a slightly annoyed look on his face, and Roland's hunch was confirmed. We'll be taking the side path. The lordling doesn't think that it would be proper to expose these noble ladies to danger. Ha, why are they even here then, to have a picnic? Armand asked while also groaning. Has anyone from you visited that path? Silvio asked as he was still a first-timer in this dungeon and quite a bit of work was shoved on Lobelia that knew the layout. Not really, we always went through here. This time around she just shrugged as most people didn't bother with taking the long route as there wasn't anything profitable there. They also just ended up back at this lake but on the other side instead. Great, okay, let us head out. They moved forward. Only when the nobles took a break and set up a new encampment would they be allowed to rest with them. For now, they needed to act as scouts and pave the road for their employees. Chapter 118 On a Cliff. This is supposed to be the safer path. A certain half-elven girl kicked a small rock down into a deep chasm. She leaned over to look down but even after some time passed she couldn't hear the stone hitting anything. Just don't fall down. Silvio replied while looking out into the distance. Roland was also there looking at this mapping device. This time around there weren't any monsters here. The path looked clear but the fall down below would probably be a death sentence. The path looks clear. Roland didn't see anything out of the ordinary in this place. They journeyed half a day to the west and finally, the large lava lake ended. The molten rocks at the end were pouring into a large chasm that at one side had a long winding path through it. They only needed to cross it to get to the other side and that would be it. On the way here they had to battle through quite a bit of tier 2 monsters, their levels mostly between 50 and 60. Even he managed to level up and finally reached the 80th level. Thanks to the Book of Runes he had managed to use his old cheat to gain levels faster. Even with that, his progress had slowed down. If he wanted to hasten it he would actually need to fight monsters closer to his own level. Name: Roland Arden L80. Classes: T2 Runesmith Lord L5 Primary, T1 Mage L25 Secondary, T1 Runic Monoscribe L25X, T1 Runic Blacksmith L25 Tertiary. HP: 2696/2696. MP: 7641/7641. SP: 3636/3636. Strength: 71. Agility: 50. Dexterity: 100. Vitality: 72. Endurance: 81. Intelligence: 131. Willpower: 120. Charisma: 17. Luck: 10. He took a glance at his status screen and now was convinced that it was the right choice to get this class. He mostly gained 2 points in each stat with agility lagging slightly behind the others. Roland had a choice to make. The tier 2 class change requirements were a bit different as he could push this class all the way up to level 50 instead of 25. Yet, he could switch to another class after 25 levels were gained in it. This left him with the option of getting more classes on the way to tier 3. The minimum level limit of a tier 3 class was 150, which left him with 25 levels of another class after he was done with the Runesmith Lord class. He felt like going to the very end with this class would be the best option. It could be a requirement for acquiring a similar strong job for his tier 3 life. This was something to think about but not something he needed to worry about much yet. His progress would slow down exponentially now. Unless he battled through hordes of high-level tier 2 monsters or gained massive amounts of runic diagrams to copy over, he would remain a tier 2 class holder for many years to come. I hope the noble ladies don't slip and fall, I bet those knights would blame us for it. Armand chuckled with his arms crossed over one another. He was looking behind them at the group of nobles that he had no respect for. Even now they were slowly moving here, their sluggish pace had now become annoying to him as well. If this continues, we will be stuck here for over a month. Roland gave out a sigh while remembering the plan of the expedition. After going through this passage they would arrive at another wider area. There they would make camp for another week and the knights would sharpen their blades on larger monsters. The secondary encampment would last for a longer period of time than the first one. That one would be closer to nests of monsters and beasts, which would be the main test for these young nobles and knights. Their group on the other hand would be quite bored and just on constant guard duty. Silvio as the best monster detector would have to stay awake for prolonged amounts of time. At least, it's easy on us, we don't need to rush much. Lobelia commented while leaning back against the rocky walls. This area of the dungeon was quite spacious, the place could even be mistaken for a smaller mountain range that went mostly downward. They caught up with us, let us move on. Roland nodded and they started walking. The path was wide enough to allow two people to walk side by side. Even with that, everyone decided to keep to the walls. If someone slipped and fell, it would be over for them. From what Roland knew, some adventurers did try to climb down from here. There were even some attachments that had some thick ropes on them. This never bore fruit as the party abandoned the descent. The further down they got, the windier it became. This was no summer breeze as the heated air didn't allow anyone to get past a certain point. They walked and walked, then walked some more. The path stretched for a lot longer than most expected. They were still underground, but this dungeon seemed like it was a world of its own. Roland started wondering about how these dungeons were created. Did this thing expand for many years below ground and finally connect to the outside a year ago? Maybe it was just created by the dungeon core in a burst of magic energy that filled out this large cavern that was here before. Some smart people even theorized that dungeons were just portals into another world that somehow existed on this plane of existence. This would somehow explain why the living monsters could never leave the dungeon unless their bodies died. What is this? Silvio suddenly jumped forward and increased his pace. The rest of the party didn't comment and just followed after the experienced adventurer. What the hell? Armand grumbled after seeing something that would just stall this expedition even further. Blocked. When Roland finally arrived, he could see the path blocked by rocks. It seemed that part of this underground mountain range had slid down and was blocking the path. This made Roland think back to the barricade those bandits built that one time. Luckily there was no place for a bandit ambush as the path they were on connected directly to the ceiling above them. Why did you stop? They were moving slowly with everyone else behind them. The knights caught up to them quite fast and Percival had moved to the forefront to see what the problem was. There must have been a landslide, it's blocking the path. There wasn't much space here, but both the knight commander and the mages came over to take a peek. Lord Percival, let me. With my earth magic I'll move these rocks in a matter of moments. The blonde girl looked pumped up, she was the earth specialist here and would finally have a moment to shine. Wait, if you use magic the path under us could give up. Silvio interjected rather quickly. It was a good idea which would probably hasten their progress. It was also very risky as the earth mage was limited in creating earth out of thin air. Certain spells could create earth like bullets, but they required a lot of mana. In this situation the girl would be shifting the existing earth to push the rocks out of the way. This could affect the foundation of this pathway, which in effect could cause them to fall down to their doom. Yes, adventurer is right, Lady Charlene, it could cause another rock slide. Lucille the Frost Mage backed up Silvio's proposition. The old man nodded his head as a thank you to the young lady while the blonde fummed a bit in disappointment. Very well, we will move the rocks out by hand then. Why are you looking at me? Armand was leaning up against the wall while Silvio and Percival looked at him. Armand, there isn't enough space for the knights to go through, Korgik will help you. Korgik and Armand had the highest physical stats from the whole party here, the knights didn't compare to them either. There was just enough space for the two and they could just throw the boulders down into the chasm below. Here, take this. Silvio handed Armand a pickaxe that they had brought along the trip. The porter that was with them had a large variety of tools including shovels. They were bought for just this sort of occasion. I'm getting paid extra for this, don't you forget it. Armand looked dejected at the fact that he would need to do this sort of work. Korgik on the other hand didn't seem to care as he started to pick up the rocks with his bare hands and toss them down into the hole below. He even started smiling at the large boulders that he threw. This is going to take a while. Yes. Roland answered while both him, Lobelia and the nun went back to give the two muscle men space. He was still holding onto the large magical rod which continued to exude cold energy. One person in particular saw this magical item that he previously didn't show off that much to her. "Sir Wayland, what type of ice magic is that?" "Ah, this is." He had talked with this girl about runes for some days now, but this didn't mean that he wanted to disclose all of his secrets. This rod was a spell structure that he himself created and also had its own operating system that no one besides him or a runic mage would be able to activate correctly. It's just an altered chilling rune with a couple of other modifications. Where the blue-haired frost mage was, there was always Robert. Even when he was on guard duty, Roland could see his brother glancing at where this young woman was. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together, there was clearly something going in between these two. By how the girl sometimes looked to Robert, it also seemed mutual. This was not really something that he cared about. The love life of his brother or any other person didn't matter one bit. The problem was that he was getting paid by this woman and also given runic research that he could not easily turn down. Due to this, he found it hard to be around her. Robert was constantly looking over his shoulder and was highly overprotective. Roland on the other hand acted suspiciously and never took his helmet down. He explained it by telling the two that he had a breathing condition and could not remove the helmet due to it. The lie seemed to have worked, but he feared that his brother would somehow find things out. He needed to get that research though, and as fast as he could. "We are almost through." Armand whipped the sweat from his eyebrow while tossing a large boulder to the side. Thanks to his enhanced stats, he didn't really feel that tired, and even the larger boulders weren't that much of a problem. Soon the other side could be seen and the path ahead of them looked clear. But then, as everyone was chatting away, used to the lack of monsters, Silvio felt something. The Tier 3 adventurer's detection skills kicked in as he could feel something moving. "Wait, hurry up, we need to leave." He rushed over to Percival to tell him something while Roland started at the adverse reaction. It seemed that they were in trouble, but there wasn't anything out of the ordinary here. There were no screaming monsters or any movement for now. Thus, to be sure, he took out his own detection device to see if there were any enemies around. After the initial look, he didn't see any red dots anywhere. Silvio continued to explain that they needed to hurry up though, which he took very seriously. "Agni, stay close to me." "Woof." The ruby wolf raised his nose up into the air while sniffing, but even he didn't see a problem anywhere, which caused him to just look at Roland with a vacant expression. It didn't seem that his canine companion could detect any danger yet. Then out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a red dot, then another one appeared, followed by many more. The dots just started increasing till there were hard to count. "What is this? But this is coming from?" He looked to the large rocky wall that connected to the ceiling above. The red dots were coming from this wall. Were there monsters behind it? Could this wall be hollow? No, it must be those. We need to move. The path wasn't fully opened up, but they needed to move forward. There was a little problem here. The group of nobles was not listening to Silvio's warnings. This blunder would cost them, as finally, a rumbling sound came from within these very walls. "What is that?" If it was only Roland's party, then they would have been fine, but with so many knights behind them, it would be troublesome. Roland moved his hand into his pouch and took out some card-sized scrolls and quickly ran towards the half-cleared path. "Hey, what are you doing?" Armand asked while being shoved to the side by Roland. "We don't have time, get back, I'm going to blow it away." "What? Are you crazy?" Armand protested, but Silvio somehow appeared right between the two men. "Do as he says, we need to get off this passage." Armand pulled away and nodded. He looked behind him and could see that the nobles were a bit in disarray. Percival did not give the order of blowing it up, but not like they had to listen to the knight commander if their life was at stake. "Get behind me, everyone!" Roland shouted while also taking out the large kite shield that he wore on his back. It was covered in runes and on the inside was a vast array of mana stones. After placing the runic explosives that were just plain old runic scrolls, he jumped back and raised his shield. He injected mana into the structure and the shield lit up. A barrier made of blue energy pushed itself out from this shield and covered most of the area in front of Roland while the people behind him covered up. Before Percival could shout, the runic scrolls detonated, causing a flash of fire. "What are you doing?" Percival shouted while covering himself up with his own shield. After the smoke had cleared, a passage wide enough for at least one person was blown through and the road ahead was open. The Knight Commander was not happy about getting ignored. He was about to give a peace of mind to this party of adventurers that were ignoring his orders. Before he could do that, a strange rattling sound was heard by him, which caused his gaze to wander towards the chasm below. "What is that?" A strange worm-like creature was spotted by him and the other knights. It just appeared out of the wall and flew down into the chasm while gnashing its teeth. Soon enough, more of these strange creatures started to appear and they were burrowing through the walls. "Volcanic worms, we must flee, they can tunnel through hard rocks." These monsters started to appear from below them, but soon enough one appeared out of the wall beside one of the knights. The creature had no eyes and wasn't that large. No one here would have a problem killing one of these creatures, but that wasn't the problem. There were just too many of them. It looked like an avalanche. Most of them appeared right below them while others from above. Many of these volcanic worms just fell down into the chasm, but others made their way towards the party of people below. The moment they spotted other living beings, they attacked. The knights had never seen something like this before, so they started to panic. Percival shouted out orders and somehow managed to get them in line. They all pushed towards the opening, with the adventurer party moving first. On the other side, Silvio and Lobelia gave the knights range support. Roland also joined in by sending arrows made from ice towards the monsters. This didn't even put a dent in their numbers and they continued to burst through the rocky wall. Luck was not something Roland was known for, and this time around it would prove his weakness once again. He wouldn't be the only one though, as at a certain point the large volcanic worms burst through the nearby rock. Lucille the Frost Mage was the unlucky person hit by this pile of creatures, which sent her tumbling down the chasm. Robert quickly followed suit. His attempt of saving the young woman was ineffective as he fell down right after. Before he knew it, Roland was also feeling gravity pulling him down as a massive pile of rocks and monsters connected with him from the side. "Why always me?" That was what he thought before falling down the cliff along with his tamed beast that for some reason decided to jump right after him. Chapter 119 Trapped. "God damn it, what is this situation? Sir Robert, please don't let go. Lady Lucille, please remain calm." Grrrrrrr. Roland was pushed down from the ledge and fallen along with his brother and the blue-haired frost mage. He managed to lodge his thick iron staff into the side of this chasm while also grabbing Robert's foot with one hand. Robert was now dangling upside down while also grasping Lady Lucille's hand. There was also a fourth person here, Agni. Roland's tamed beast jumped right after his master into the large pit below. He somehow managed to grasp one of Roland's ankles with his muzzle and was now also dangling around. "Stop squirming around all of you or we will fall," he shouted at the two below him as the piece of metal that he shoved into the side of this rock was already twitching from the weight. There was no way that anyone from above will come to save them, so it was up to him to do something about it. "Is there somewhere? Wait, what is that?" While examining the situation, he noticed something in the distance. There wasn't much light here, so he quickly activated his helmet's night sight spell. Thanks to it he could see a somewhat larger opening in the wall. It might have been a natural cave or one made by the volcanic worm creatures. The important part was that it would allow them to stand. "There is a cave there, but it's about 50 meters away from us." 50 meters? "We will never make it," Robert replied while sweating. There was no way of him being able to do anything here. He could only see Lucille's scared face and behind her the dark unknown abyss. "Okay, hold on, I'll make a platform." Roland on the other hand had ways of getting all four of them out of this predicament. He had no knowledge of spells that could make people float, so he went with a different option. His free foot was raised up and he was just close enough to the wall to touch it. He risked losing his grip while doing this, but there was no other way. The two people below him shook around and the woman started screaming, but after an orange flash of light, she started to quiet down. By pressing his foot against the wall, Roland activated one of his attacking spells, the one that could produce spikes made from hard rocks. On the fly, he altered the runic code slightly to make these spikes wider and gird here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 smaller platforms sprung up in a matter of seconds. He aimed them directly under the group of people hanging. He wasn't sure how many he needed to support all of their weight, but he would figure it out the hard way. His magical rod started bending down and the rocks it was slammed into finally gave out. "Anu!" Lucille screamed as she felt gravity taking over once again. Robert on the other hand quickly yanked the woman upwards while trying to shield her from any harm. The fall wasn't steep now though, as both of them landed on the platform that Roland created with his earth spell. Roland inserted his staff into the rocks once more while also pulling Agni up and placing him over his shoulder. The two slid down some more and also safely landed on this pile of rocks that he magically created. "It's holding." He let out a sigh of relief as the ground under them was able to sustain their weight. "Agni!" Roland called out to his ruby wolf that was now somehow clinging to his shoulder. Agni, even without being given the order, knew what he was supposed to do. The small gem that was on his forehead quickly lit up to show everyone the way. What was revealed to both of them was Lucille, who was clinging like a chimp to Robert's chest. It looked like the young girl had closed her eyes and even now was trembling from fright. Robert on the other hand had also plunged his sword into the wall for some added support as he mimicked Roland. "Wait a moment, I will create more platforms, we must get to that cave there." Roland pointed into the distance and now thanks to Agni's light even Robert could see the opening. The walls were also covered with many smaller exit holes that were probably made by those monsters. It seemed that there were no more volcanic worms out here anymore, which would allow them to safely reach that cave. "Please do." Surprisingly, Robert just nodded while moving himself out of the way. He clung to the wall with the woman in his arms. It seemed that he knew that he needed to rely on Roland's magic, and Lucille didn't look like someone that could help them as she was still panicking. It was up to Roland to get them out of this predicament. This time around it wasn't his foot but his hand. His armor didn't need to have specific spells placed on them anymore. Now, after figuring out the runic programming language, he was able to customize his armor even more. The main runic structures were all in the chest area while his hands and legs were used to discharge the spells. He could activate any of them from any extremity, he just needed to activate the correct executable in his pre-made program. Thus, after placing his palm on the wall, more platforms started to appear. There was some space between them as they were just made for them to walk to the other side. "Let's go." Robert nodded while Roland moved first. The knight carried the shaky mage girl in his arms while Roland created more platforms for them on the way towards the cave opening. In about 10 minutes of slow walking they finally made it and ducked inside of this unlit cave. "Woof!" Agni flopped his tongue out while also jumping down. He sniffed the air around and informed Roland that he could not detect any danger. "This cave, it doesn't look like it was made by those monsters." Roland quickly examined the walls in here, they didn't look to have been dug by the monsters. The ceiling here reached up to about 5 meters and the width was about 3. It was quite the spacious cavern and all of them could fit in it nicely. "Are you two?" Roland turned around as he didn't get a reply. "Please give her some time," Robert replied while giving Roland a stern look. Lucille looked quite shaken up from this fall that almost killed her. It was a natural response to something like this, he had almost forgotten. This woman was a sheltered noble lady, this was probably the first time her life was at risk. He nodded while Robert carried her further into the cave. "Agni, stay with them." After leaving the light source with them, Roland moved to where the cavern started. He looked down and even with his night vision on he could not see an ending in sight. When he looked up he could also not see anything past a certain point. How far did we fall? He had panicked a bit after getting shoved into the pit. Due to this his perception of time had been skewed, if he knew that he could calculate how far they went down. "Can anyone hear me?" Roland moved his hands to his mouth and shouted out, his voice echoed through this chasm but he did not get a reply. "Hello." He shouted a few more times but he did not get a reply back. Silvio with his enhanced senses might have been able to hear them but he, on the other hand, could not. While pointing up with one of his fingers a bolt of light energy appeared. He shot it up into the sky and could see the place lighting up. His spell traveled up and up before finally dimming and it coming undone. He did the light signals a couple of times before stopping but even when waiting he could not see anyone replying. If the party couldn't hear or see the flashes of light up there they might have fallen in too deep. "How are you?" Roland returned into the cave and he could see Lucille leaning up against the wall. Sir Wayland, I'm fine now." Robert was right next to her along with Agni. "I'm not sure if they could hear me. I don't see any way up or down either." There were a couple of options here. They could try climbing up by Roland creating small platforms for them to stand on. His mana wouldn't last long though, he would probably have more luck going up himself and leaving those two behind here. The other option was to just wait, maybe someone would see the light signals or hear them shouting for help. They didn't know if the others even made it out alive, everyone could have very well fallen down into this deep chasm. Then there was the third option, going deeper into the cave. It might connect to a secret unmapped path through which they could get out. For this decision to be made they needed more information but contacting the others would be paramount. "Any injuries?" "No Sir Wayland, I'm fine." "And you?" Roland turned to Robert who looked as grumpy as ever. "I'm fine." "Adventurer, do you know where we are?" "No, this is a portion of the dungeon that has not been mapped before. There is no way for me to know where this cave leads either. If we could contact my party members maybe we could get some help." Robert nodded while Roland grabbed his heavy staff. He looked to it and to the walls. There was a certain code similar to Morse code in this world. Maybe if he tapped the walls here the sound would travel far enough for Silvio to notice it. He believed that that man would probably know the code and maybe even be able to hear it with his enhanced senses. Contact them. Before he could go forward with his plan, Lucille called out to him. "Yes, we need to see if they are alive. They might be able to organize a rescue party if they know our location." "Ah. Give me a moment Sir Wayland." Lucille looked like she remembered something. The woman still had her spatial satchel strapped to the side and she moved her hand into it. After a moment she pulled out a crystal ball. "Is that?" "Yes, it is." Lucille nodded and Roland nodded back. Robert on the other hand narrowed his eyes at the ball not knowing what the thing was. "Ah, excuse me, Sir Robert, this is a transmission stone. Lady Charlene has a similar one, I should be able to talk to her with it. Give me a moment to set it up." The young frost mage got to work. Agni helped out by lighting the way. The girl needed to draw a magic circle around this magical device to activate it. Roland paid attention to the drawing and was sure to glance at the item that she was holding. Regretfully it was not a runic item of any sort, it seemed to use the enchanting language instead and this was probably why it also required an outside magic circle for it to function. With not much else to do, he decided to glance at his brother's status screen. With his level eclipsing his and his analyzing skill gaining some levels he was even able to see his full stats. The only thing he could not see were the skills that he managed to learn through the years. Name: Robert Arden L56. Classes: T1 Warrior L25X, T1 Squire L25 Secondary, T2 Sword Knight L6 Main. HP: 1965/1965. MP: 639/639. SP: 2564/2564. Strength: 75. Agility: 45. Dexterity: 40. Vitality: 70. Endurance: 73. Intelligence: 27. Willpower: 39. Charisma: 16. Luck. 17. Strength, vitality, and endurance were his main 3 stats. Robert's strength was even above Roland's even though he outleveled his brother by over 20 levels. This was mostly due to Roland's 50 levels of both Mage and Runic Mana Scribe. Both those classes mostly added to his willpower and intelligence stat while ignoring his physical stats. Even though his strength was 4 points below Robert's, he was still stronger. This was all thanks to his Lord class. Robert's Tier 2 multiplier was only 1.5 while Roland's was 2. With the multiplier, Robert's strength would come out to 112,5 points. Roland on the other hand with his 71 points in strength would have 142 points in it. The class that he received was truly prestigious and gave him a big advantage over Tier 2 classes. Robert would need another 20 strength to equal things out. Raw stats weren't everything though. Physical classes also possessed skills that could boost their attacks and multiply them even further. Just like Armand was able to temporarily give himself a boost, a sword knight with a proper sword would not be an easy target to defeat. Lucille on the other hand would remain a mystery. He could not examine her stats at all as he could only see question marks everywhere. It was clear that the girl was wearing some kind of item that was blocking his identifying attempts. There it's done. Another 10 minutes passed and even when listening in, there was nothing but howling whines coming from outside. They were still at the entrance of the cave, wandering deeper into it was not yet an option. Lady Lucille, will this really work? It should. I hope Lady Charlene is okay. Roland went quiet for now, he knew some basics about this crystal ball. He was worried a bit that it wouldn't be able to reach outside the dungeon. For some reason, all types of communication devices would not connect to any people outside of the dungeon. Thus this Lady Charlene would probably be the only person able to receive this message. Lady Charlene, can you hear me? The small crystal sphere began glowing in blue light and the magic circle around it activated nicely. After a minute of trying there was no reply, but Lucille wasn't yet worried. This could take a while. She will need to create a similar magic circle, but she should be notified about our existence. She replied while keeping her eyes on the crystal ball. Roland only nodded and moved a bit towards the insides of the cave without moving too far away from the magical circle. With his night vision, he could see further than what the dim light from Agni's forehead was showing them. He could see that this cave went on for quite a bit as the tunnel continued before turning a corner. Roland pulled out his own magical mapping device and gave it a go. With it, he could see that there were some red dots further inside. The dots representing monsters weren't moving in any particular direction, which told him that they weren't aware of their existence just yet. Luke ill. I'm here, can you hear me? Suddenly he heard the blue-haired lady's ecstatic voice. After returning to the communication device he could see the Earth Mage appearing on the small crystal orb. By the gods, you are alive, I was sure that you fell to your death. There was some static at first, but soon the audio became clearer and it was not possible to converse with Lady Charlene. Though the blonde girl was quickly pushed to the side by the commander Lord Percival. Lady Lucille, where are you? How did you survive? Can you tell us where you are? The young man looked a bit frantic for some reason as he asked all the questions that Lucille tried to answer. She gave him a quick recount of the situation about how Roland managed to catch them and that they were in some cave. The adventurer? I'll be sure to reward him when he comes back. Lady Lucille, could you ask if they heard or saw my magic? Ah, of course, Sir Wayland. Lucille explained Roland's attempts at contacting them by making a lot of noise, but Percival denied hearing anything. There was also another problem. The Knight Commander explained that they had to move from the path as it had partially collapsed afterward. It was a miracle that all of the knights and adventurers were still alive. Roland could only blame his bad luck that he was tossed down while everyone else somehow remained on top. It seemed that they would not be able to climb back up, at least not until a rescue party was formed that could climb down. Please be assured, Lady Lucille, I will do everything in my power to get you home safely. The conversation continued for a while before the communication device needed to be shut off. This type of item needed to cool down after each usage. What should we do now? Lucille asked while looking at Robert and then to Roland that was deep in thought. Don't worry, Lady Lucille, I will protect you with my life. Robert took this chance to reassure the lady once more. She just smiled and nodded. Roland on the other hand looked at his bags of holding. Let me ask you, do you have any food in your travel bags? Food? The porters were tasked to carry it. The girl replied. Robert as well shook his head, none of them were adventurers, so they let the servants worry about the food. I thought so, think we will have to see what this cave has to offer. Roland looked into the dark depths of this cave, knowing well that monsters were waiting inside. Chapter 120, More trouble on the horizon. Clang! Clang! Whew, it's done. A certain half-dwarf looked at a piece of armor that he had created. He placed it to the side while grabbing a small monocle. After holding it out in front of the item that he made, he could see floating words above it. Good, next I'll make the greave, then it will be time for the Pauline, but first things first. Hee hee. Bernier stepped out of the secret workshop and sat himself down on a wooden rocking chair that he made himself. In his hand was a dark bottle filled with beer he had previously brought over. Thanks to Roland's runic fridge, he was even able to keep it cool through the day. Working for a runesmith sure is great. He cheered to himself while taking a swig. It had been about a week since his boss had gone out on the expedition. From what he knew, it would last for at least 2 more weeks before they returned, so he had the whole place to himself. Should I bring that girl over? Bernier smirked a bit after remembering a certain waitress that he met at the local tavern. She was a similar mix to his own race and he was getting good vibes. Then he recalled his young boss and how he had told him that he would know if there were other people here. Bringing over guests that he did not approve of was strictly forbidden. A wench is not worth losing this job over. The idea was quickly shelved after he remembered the previous months. He was finally able to reach a tier 2 class and the future looked bright. What if his boss decided to kick him to the curb after finding some knickers stashed behind the couch? I need to finish this armor before he comes back, with runes on it will sell for a high price. Since Roland had gone away, Bernier had been busy with work. He didn't sleep much and the drinking of alcohol had also gone down slightly. His intent was to surprise his boss with an intermediate deep steel suit of armor of his own making. From his calculations and current speed, he would have it ready in about 10 days. His fast pace was all thanks to several runic tools that he was able to use now. Soon he was back at it, but unbeknownst to him, he was being watched by an unknown guest. A shadowy figure was hidden away upon a faraway tree. He had a portable telescope in hand and was looking through it at the only person present in the walled-off house. The person on a tree continued to watch until the half-dwarf ducked back into the house before leaving. At a steady pace, he returned to the city and headed over to the part of town that Roland had his second run-in with Armand. In a similar-looking establishment, he found a group of 3 people sitting at a table. "Okay, what did you find out?" one of the men asked. "As I suspected, he is living by himself there, no signs of that Wayland character. How about you?" The man answered while all of the people present here smirked. "Yeah, I've dug up some information from the guild. Listen to this. A week ago a large expedition into the dungeon was started. It wasn't officially posted, but that bastard should be gone for another week or 2. So, are we going to move? I've heard things about that Wayland. Remember the boys from Dread End? No one has heard from them ever since they tousled with that guy, he even broke their legs." Another person from the group commented while downing an alcoholic drink. "Yet if we do this, we will have to skip town, the guild is also getting involved with him." "I agree, there might not be a chance like this ever again. He must have many magical contraptions stashed away along with gold. We can leave the island and sell them off at the mainland guilds. That will be best, the guild doesn't have a strong presence here yet, we can always come back later when things calm down. We need to prepare the escape route first, check when the ships are leaving, we'll then join the caravan and head to the port town." The group of four chatted for a bit more before leaving. Their faces were covered by robes so no one could really get a good look at them. Even without it, most people knew to evade these thieving types that could slit your throat for a silver coin. We should have enough water to last us for a while. Roland showed off a leather water container that he brought onto the trip. It was a regular spatial bag that was filled with only water. Thanks to the spatial magic, the amount of water that it could contain was truly immense. As for food, it's mostly bread and dried meat. On the other hand, the rations of food would be limited. He only had an emergency portion for himself while most of the rest was left with the porters. Oh my, what will we do? Lucille panicked a little bit. The group of three and a wolf were now around each other. Roland had asked them about their belongings as they might have to stay in this cave for a while. Don't worry my lady, you can have my share. Robert quickly replied while Roland rolled his eyes. He was the only one with any food or water, but his older brother didn't even think about asking for it. It was as if it was a given that he would need to share it with the group of three. It's Sir Wayland's food, he should decide. On the other hand, this girl had more sense. He was even questioning her noble roots. She didn't act as one of those stuck-up girls that he saw on some of the noble get-togethers he had to attend. Most of them were more similar to the young woman that liked to stick close to Percival. Before we divide anything, we need to decide if we are moving or staying. There are monsters inside. They could also be a source of nutrients. Even though most people didn't eat monster meat, it didn't mean it was not possible. Most monsters were just too wiry, some poisonous, and some not even made from flesh in the first place. If they found any monsters that could be eaten remained to be seen. Monsters inside? Shouldn't we just wait for the rescue party? Sir Robert. She looked to Robert, who looked a bit troubled. None of them had much experience with dungeons. Lady Lucille, I'm not sure if they can form a rescue party this fast. We might have to remain here for many days. Roland was a bit surprised that Robert didn't sugarcoat it, but this would hasten the process. He is right, the main camping area wasn't that far from that location. They will probably return there and have some of my party members go through the lava lake. Roland wasn't sure if the exam would be abandoned just like that. Now with the important noble lady trapped here, they would probably send for help but might also remain here and wait. They had all the provisions so they could wait it out till a proper rescue party formed from the adventurers outside. How long will that take, Sir Wayland? How long? If they are fast, 3 to 4 days. If not, it could take weeks. Finding adventurers that can climb the chasm down won't be that easy. They might have to bring a specialist from an outside town, which might push the rescue operation further back. He continued talking, and with each theory, the rescue became farther and farther away. In a worst-case scenario, they could be stuck here for even a month. With only food for a couple of days, it would be hard not to starve. Roland and Robert had higher vitality stats than Lucille, which would allow them both to last longer than the mage. She, on the other hand, would feel it the worst. Then there was also the hot stuffy air, which only made them sweat. This would make them lose precious water and also salt plus minerals with it. Sir Robert, I think Sir Wayland should make the decision. Lady Lucille. He has the most experience from all of us, and we would have died if he didn't rescue us. I just froze. Lucille dropped her head in shame as she recalled her clinging to Robert while they were outside of the cliff. If that is what the lady wishes. Robert looked at Roland in a strange way. These were not the eyes of the young boy that liked to punch him whenever they came across each other. Then he did something even more unexpected by walking forward and bowing. As a knight of Arden, I must thank you for saving the lady and myself. We from the Arden estate always repay our dues. Me too. Lucille for some reason moved right next to Roland and started bowing as well. These two were truly strange. They did not know his noble roots, yet they still lowered their heads. This was something unfathomable, even less for someone like this lady who was from a Viscount family and was also a magician. You don't need to bow, I'm just following my contract. Roland coughed into his palm awkwardly and quickly turned around. The detection device that he previously used was still in one of his hands. He tried to forget about the embarrassing situation by activating it. This item didn't go unnoticed as Lucille quickly looked over his shoulder. What she saw was an illuminated map of some sorts with various dots of different coloring. "Oh, what is that, Sir Wayland?" "Ah, it's just the map of this area. Do you see the red dots? Those are monsters." He gave her a short explanation of this map while also pointing that not far from here there was some kind of monster lurking. There weren't that many red dots there, only 2. This also meant that the swarm of volcanic worms was not here. Monsters? Where are they? Robert on the other hand looked at the map but then quickly moved in front of the 2. He looked into the dimly illuminated cavern by Agni's forage gem. "The monsters haven't noticed us yet, we should be able to surprise them, but first, tell me about your weapons." Roland could see that Robert was missing his shield. He only had a one-handed sword with him along with a hidden dagger as a backup weapon. Their frost mage had lost her main magical staff during the fall, but her satchel was still there. In it, she had some magical items along with potions and a backup one-handed rod. Roland even contemplated giving her his oversized rod of frost magic, but due to the peculiar operating system it was running on, it would be hard to control for anyone other than him. "Let us head out." For now, Robert and Roland both stayed in the front while Agni was given guard duty with Lucille. The ruby wolf was tasked to make noise if he spotted anything creeping up from behind. Even though this was still only a one-way cave, it didn't mean that monsters couldn't burrow through the walls or use some sort of stealth skills. Lucille was given Roland's mappings for as he had to pay attention. "Looks like it's a volcanic variant of a scolopendra." Roland peeked out of the corner and saw an insect-like creature that looked close to what a centipede would look like. Its hide was covered in dark red carapace and it had many legs. These types of monsters can't see well. Watch out for their spit, it's hot magma. The common variant of this Tier 2 monster mostly spat out poison at their opponents. This poison, if inhaled, would slowly seep into their victim's body, rendering them immobile. Thus it was quite the troublesome creature. Luckily this volcanic cousin didn't possess this attribute. "There are 2 of them. Stand back for a moment. When I give the signal, we'll attack together." Sir Robert was it. His true identity wasn't revealed yet and he was still resolute in keeping it this way. Robert only nodded at the question while slowly moving his sword into position. Roland grasped his magical rod and pointed it at the creatures. They had remained silent, so they hadn't been spotted quite yet. This monster was practically blind and would mostly use its antennae to locate its prey. Soon it felt something, but it was too late as a basketball-sized ball of ice collided with its head. The monster didn't suffer much damage from the ball of ice but was rendered paralyzed due to the sudden drop in temperature. Its friend that was to the side suffered the same fate. Now, Robert and Roland dived in for the kill. Roland switched out from his magical rod to the arming sword that was attached to his hip. Both of them quickly severed the insects' heads in one strong slash, killing them instantly. The 2 men didn't drop their guard just yet as they observed the surroundings. Luckily for them, Roland's detection device was working as intended and now the 2 red dots were gone and no monsters remained. "Good work, Sir Robert, Sir Wayland." Robert smiled at Lucille that peeked her head out of the corner while Roland just nodded his head. He pushed the creature over with his rod and looked at the spot that he cut off its head. "Don't think this one's edible." The 2 nobles looked like he was a madman for even considering such a thing, but they didn't voice their thoughts. There was one member from the party that saw this as an opportunity to feast. "Woof! You sure you want to eat that? Go ahead then." Agni started nibbling on the monster meat that was now exposed after the slicing. Everyone looked at the ruby wolf with slight disgust after witnessing him feasting on giant insect remains. At least this meant that they had one less mouth to feed. The wolf would even be able to consume raw monster bodies to sustain himself. "That spot is. So you can tell." Lucille, being a mage, had the mana sense skill as well. She could clearly tell where the mana stones were hidden inside of the monster's remains. Agni could do this as well, and he was in the process of devouring one of the mana stones as they were speaking. It's a special skill he developed. He can't eat too many of those stones though. Fascinating. Robert looked between the 2 without knowing what they were talking about. Before he could mope for being left out of the conversation, they continued deeper into the cave. The plan was to see if it led anywhere with an exit while remaining vigilant. They scouted further into the cave. After about 200 meters they came across more monsters. This time around it was a strange slug-like creature that was crawling on the ceiling. It had a red tint to it and the mucus it was soaked in looked quite hot. Like the other monsters in here, it could not handle ice magic at all, dropping dead after a single hit from an ice ball. Thanks to Roland's detection device they were able to avoid any hidden monsters and luckily no traps were along the way either. After 15 minutes of walking all of them halted. In the distance, they saw some kind of strange light. It looked green at first but then switched to blue. It was in the distance and the mapping device showed a larger open area there, along with a couple of red dots. It looked like a more open battle was approaching them with more enemies this time around. Roland stopped in his tracks and looked to Robert, and after a moment of silence, he handed him his runic shield that he wore on his back. Here, it's set to an ice shield if you activate it. You have my thanks. Robert had lost his shield during the fall and with only a one-handed blade he would not be at his best. Roland on the other hand had his magical rod along with his sword, plus his armor that could also cast some shielding spells. Before entering they quickly discussed the combat strategy, then they headed towards the light. Maybe after arriving in that bright room, they would be able to figure out where they dropped down to.